We are welcoming our viewers from BBC Two, and there you see down the Mall to Buckingham Palace that the royal standard is flying, which signals that King Charles is at home. And in fact, it has been a busy morning for the King and also the newly created Prince of Wales. The two of them have been out and about visiting crowds on the Albert Embankment close to Lambeth Bridge this morning, not just for a short while either. They were present for about 20 minutes, engaging in conversation with all these people who've had quite a chilly night. Those who've been in the queue through the night said that it was a little bit colder last night, and certainly they were welcoming the morning sun this morning. Many of them well prepared to wait in line, and mercifully the queue is a little bit shorter. It was around 25 hours last night, but it's now down to about 14 hours. There you see Prince William, who tonight will be on duty again because he is due, with all the Queen's grandchildren, to stand vigil here in Westminster Hall, as the Queen's children did, of course, last night. King Charles has also visited the new Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, this morning. Also there was the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who have quite an awesome responsibility over the next 2 or 3 days. Over 500 dignitaries due in London from 200 different countries. There'll be 20 royals here. Security uppermost. It may be one of the biggest policing operations the Met Police has overseen in many, many years. Well, Queen Elizabeth had a strong attachment to France, a country she visited many times and whose language she spoke fluently. France reciprocated the feeling. President Macron said the French were grateful for Her Majesty's deep affection for their country. She mastered our language, he said. She loved our culture and she touched our hearts. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
In 1948, aged just 22, Her Majesty fell for Paris and Paris fell for her. On an official visit representing her father, the newly married Princess Elizabeth was the toast of the town, charming her hosts with her grace, beauty and perfect French.
Je suis particulièrement heureuse que ce soit pour venir en France.
That post-war visit left the Queen with happy memories, not least of the flower market near Notre Dame Cathedral, which she loved and which now bears her name. Her Majesty came back to France many times over her long reign. The last occasion was in 2014, and at the end of that state visit, she expressly asked for a chance to come back again and look around this flower market, which she'd first seen as a young woman 66 years before. For the florist who had the task of handing the Queen a bouquet on that visit 8 years ago, it was a day not to be forgotten.
I fell in love with her on the spot. You could tell straight away this was a woman of substance. You know, the Queen's not showbiz. She's not Madonna, but a truly great person.
Head of the French state, Charles de Gaulle.
From Charles de Gaulle in 1960 on, she met all the presidents of the Fifth Republic, helping smooth over the rows of the moment and keeping the entente cordiale. With François Mitterrand in 1994, she inaugurated the Channel Tunnel, and she returned regularly for anniversaries of the D-Day landings in Normandy. In 2008, she welcomed Nicolas Sarkozy and his wife Carla Bruni for a state banquet at Windsor Castle. He found it magnificent that after riding together in a gilded coach, the Queen showed her guests personally to their bedroom. Today, he says, the UK must not forget the huge affection felt for Her Majesty on this side of the Channel too.
We were so used to having Queen Elizabeth in our lives that we could not imagine she would one day leave us. It's no small paradox that this woman, who kept herself out of the media, was, in reality, so very present in our lives. And not just in the lives of the British, but in the life of all of Europe.
At the UK Embassy in Paris, people have been coming to sign the book of condolences for Her Majesty. As President Macron put it, for the French, she may not have been their Queen. She was, more simply perhaps, the Queen. Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
Much loved in France. Well, as Prince William takes over from his father as the Duke of Cornwall, thousands of people will be getting a new landlord. Part of the duchy is the town of Nans-le-Dun near Newquay, which has developed was developed by King Charles III and reflects his well-known concern for the environment. Our correspondent Jenny Kumar has been speaking to some of the residents.
As a prince, King Charles often spoke about the importance of the environment and architectural design. His Majesty's passion for those subjects has been injected into his vision for this new development.
This space here was built for the community as a quiet space.
What's it like living here?
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, there's a really good community spirit here in Nansledden. That was one of the things that King Charles was really keen to build, was this community spirit, and we form a committee to bring people together. We hold events on a regular basis, and you know, it's all about bringing everybody together.
Walking around, you can see evidence of the King's commitment to the environment. Houses have built-in birds' nests and bee bricks, and fruit trees line the streets.
Here we've got an apple tree. These are all over the estate, where it's all about sustainability, all about wildlife, keeping wildlife within the community so that it's not all gone because we've built houses in this particular area.
We put it on the steam.
For this hat maker, the sustainability vision is a perfect fit with his business. Marcel uses renewable energy and ethical suppliers. He met the King earlier this year.
It was a lovely, lovely experience. He shared a really keen interest in what we do sustainability-wise.
And how are you feeling about the new Duke, a new generation coming?
Again, excited. I think, I don't think much is going to change. Obviously, Prince William is going to carry on the legacy of his father. And I think, again, it would be nice to have some young blood coming through.
The King wanted to create a vibrant community with homes, shops, offices and green spaces all within walking distance. Around 600 homes have been built since 2014, 30% are affordable. And this bakery was one of the first businesses to open here.
It's a huge project and it's well under the way, so hopefully with the team that they've got, it'll continue in the same vein. I feel like we're in good hands, especially with the new Duke of Cornwall.
And how hopeful are you that the Duke and his family will visit soon?
It'd be fantastic to meet him. Obviously we've grown up with similar age, got similar age children, and you see their lives like in parallel to ours, and that would be, it'd be fantastic to meet him. We'd really love that.
So plenty of optimism about the future here, with many feeling that the new Duke of Cornwall, Prince William, together with his father's vision, is a recipe for success. Jenny Kumar, BBC News.
Heads of state and foreign dignitaries from around the world are expected to attend the Queen's funeral on Monday, and they will be joined by a cowboy from California. Monty Roberts is famous for his non-violent horse training, a method that impressed the Queen and formed the basis of a decades-long friendship. The BBC's Reagan Morris met Monty at his ranch in Solheim, California, before he left for the UK.
Member of the Victorian Order, a knighthood, a cowboy from California gets a knighthood. Can you believe it? And this was given to me in her office, not outside with the top hat and tails and all that stuff. In her office, very personally. He loves to run. Like that. Her Majesty's in a meeting in Northern Ireland with the politicians there, and she won't be able to take your call. And I said, oh, well, that's okay. Just tell me when I should call back then. And then I heard, Monty, how are you? Your Majesty. They told me you couldn't take the call. No, she said, they probably told you I was in a meeting with important people, and your calls are more important to me than anything, so I came out of the meeting and took the call. I almost fell off the phone. I couldn't believe it. I've never been received by people like that in my life. There's letters in here and Christmas cards in here. Here's one from the military in England and the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States. The Queen up here with her family and her favorite group of horses, Prince Philip and the Queen here, and letters that were written, and to be sure, with some integrity, because she wrote this letter and she addressed the envelope too. But in order to save a bit of loose change, she wrote on the back of the stationery. I'm sorry for me, I'm sorry for the world, I'm sorry for the family. She was just a wonderful person that just shouldn't have died, ever. I know it has to happen, but I just loved her so much.
What an extraordinary relationship. She loved watching her horses run. In fact, I was just looking actually, she won the 4 races that made up the Classic. So she won the 1,000 and 2,000 guineas, she won the Oaks and the St Leger throughout the years, but she never did win the Derby. Never had a horse that won the Derby, which was the one trophy that was missing from her collection. So many happy memories for people who went to the horse racing and enjoyed the horses with her. This is the scene inside Westminster Hall. Plenty more coverage to come.
Good afternoon. It has turned into a beautiful day for many of us after what was a decidedly chilly start. The coldest start we've had for quite some time, with a number of spots in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland dropping to freezing or below. Even in the heart of London, temperatures dropped to around 7 degrees overnight. But we have had lots of sunshine so far today. The satellite picture from earlier on does show more cloud across some parts of Scotland, particularly up towards the north. That cloud continuing to slip southwards as we go through the afternoon, with the odd shower. Also some showers affecting eastern coasts, particularly around the coast of Norfolk, blown in on quite a brisk breeze. Lighter winds further west. Plenty of sunshine, particularly for Wales, the Midlands, the southwest of England. Temperatures between 14 and 18 degrees. A rather cool and quite autumnal feel to the weather. Now in the London area, it stays mostly sunny through the rest of today. Into Sunday and Monday, we will see more in the way of cloud, perhaps producing just the odd shower, particularly during Sunday. As we go through this evening and tonight, we are going to see more cloud rolling its way in from the northwest. Could bring the odd shower across Scotland, maybe Northern Ireland and Northern England by the end of the night. Further south, where we keep the clearest of the skies, could be the odd mist patch, and it will be another chilly night, maybe down to around 3 degrees in some spots in the countryside. A little milder further north to start tomorrow morning, where we have more in the way of cloud and 1 or 2 showers. It's not completely impossible that we could see the odd shower just getting down into the London area during the afternoon. At the same time, it should start to brighten up a little in the northeast of Scotland, with some spells of sunshine. Still quite breezy for this east coast, 15 for Newcastle. Further south and west, highs of around 17 or 18 degrees. As we head into Monday, the day of the Queen's state funeral, high pressure will be building more strongly across the UK. Certainly for England and Wales, that will keep things largely dry, with some spells of sunshine, a bit more cloud developing as the day wears on. For Northern Ireland and for Scotland, a weak frontal system will bring more in the way of cloud. Some spots of rain, still some brightness in northeast Scotland, with temperatures in Aberdeen up to 14 degrees. Highest values in the southwest, 20 in Plymouth.
Hello, welcome to BBC News. I'm Ben Brown, live at Buckingham Palace, where King Charles has been out to speak to mourners. There were cheers as King Charles III and the Prince of Wales went to greet people who are waiting in the queue for the Queen's lying in state at Westminster Hall. Meanwhile, there have been rehearsals for the state funeral procession at Windsor. Some of the details for the funeral were overseen by the late Queen Elizabeth before her death.
I'm Christian Fraser. In other news, investigations are continuing into possible Russian war crimes in the city of Izium. More than 400 bodies are being exhumed from a burial site. As Russia loses ground in Ukraine, President Biden warns Moscow not to resort to the use of chemical or tactical nuclear weapons. India's Prime Minister releases 8 cheetahs into a national park 70 years after the world's fastest land animal was declared extinct in the country.
Hello, we're live here at Buckingham Palace. It's a beautiful day, glorious sunshine and blue skies. And there was huge excitement here among the crowd who gathered outside Buckingham Palace when they saw the King leave a little bit earlier on today and then the Prince of Wales leave. They didn't know where they were going, but in fact they were going to visit the queue, the thousands of people who are in central London who have been queuing for hour after hour to see the Queen's lying in state at Westminster Hall. And we saw King Charles there thanking people for waiting through the night, a queue that has lasted at some stages for 25 hours. It's down now to about 14 hours, we think. But King Charles there just showing the style of his new reign, that he wants to go and thank people, and so too Prince William, who was there thanking all the people, well, at least a large number of people who were in the queue. He was joking with them that he hoped they hadn't got frozen during the night. He was joking that his father was quicker than him in moving down the queue and talking to people. And also William said to some of those who were queuing that the Queen would never have believed the spectacle here, where so many people have been waiting for so long to view her coffin in Westminster Hall. And we've also been seeing King Charles, who has been visiting the Special Operations Room of the Metropolitan Police ahead of what is a mammoth policing operation, meeting the new Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Mark Rowley, also the Home Secretary and the Mayor of London. It is the biggest policing operation ever undertaken in the capital by the Metropolitan Police. Well, last night, King Charles, the Princess Royal, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward held a silent vigil by their mother's coffin, and the Queen's 8 grandchildren, including Princes William and Prince Harry, will hold their own vigil later on today. Prince Harry, by the way, has been given special dispensation to wear his military uniform, even though he's not now a working royal. Paul Adams has this report.
By day and night, the ritual continues. The third full day on which members of the public from far and wide have come to offer thanks and say goodbye. These people endured a long, cold night for the chance of a few brief moments. It's quiet, respectful, the atmosphere of reverence only punctuated briefly last night as a man tried to rush the coffin and was wrestled to the ground. Earlier, the late Queen's 4 children, all in uniform, mounted their own vigil. Tonight it'll be the turn of her 8 grandchildren, very public displays of private grief.
How humbling is that?
You got to see the whole family. It was incredible, absolutely amazing.
No, it was a very emotional moment, and that just added to the whole afternoon, evening. Unbelievable.
She's the only female we've ever had and will ever have on our planet that is known by everybody in the world, from the smallest island to the largest area on our planet. No, she's just the only one, our Queen. And that to me fills me with I tell you, it's just immense pride.
And with each passing day, more signs of round-the-clock preparations. This was Windsor in the early hours of the morning. Grenadier Guards accompanying the hearse that will carry the Queen's coffin back to the castle for Monday's final ceremonies. At Windsor's Victoria Barracks, representatives of all three services getting ready for something they, and most of us, have not seen before.
Plenty of preparation and planning's gone into this, clearly, to make sure the late Majesty Queen Elizabeth has the best that we can give her, and everything went exactly to plan, to be honest. Apart from the weather this morning being a bit nippy, it's all good.
At Lambeth Bridge, a warm welcome for the King and his eldest son as the two mingled with those waiting to pay respects to the Queen.
30 hours no sleep.
Did you 30 hours?
Yeah.
Well, you're very good on 30 hours.
These walkabouts already a hallmark of the new King's reign. It's here that he seems to be most relaxed and happy.
3 cheers for His Majesty!
Back at Westminster Hall, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was among world leaders paying respects this morning. Politicians, past and present, are all taking their turns. For 70 years, people came to London to see the Queen. They're still doing it today. Paul Adams, BBC News.
The latest we have on the length of the queue now for Westminster Hall is 16.5 hours. It's been varying. It was 25 hours at one stage, went down then to about 14, but it's now 16.5 hours. But it is a beautiful day for people to be queuing. Let's talk to our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell, who's with me here now at Buckingham Palace. Sarah, those walkabout pictures we've just been watching, Paul Adams was saying it's a mark of the King's quite informal style of monarchy that we've seen in the first few days of his reign.
Yeah, and what a treat for those people who'd been spent all night queuing up to be able to have that moment with both the King and the Prince of Wales. And yeah, I think you're right. I think you can sort of looking at his face, despite the fact this is obviously a very difficult time personally, he does seem to enjoy getting that sort of personal connection, going out and meeting people, he was thanking people. There were cries of God save the King. He was asking questions, such as I hope you're not too cold, and how long have you been here? And I've been on sort of many trips with Prince Charles, and he does seem to enjoy genuinely meeting people. I remember we went in Canada and we'd had 3 days, absolutely hectic schedule, and yet he still found the time to really make sure that this was an element of the trip that he wanted to make sure happen. So yeah, it's different to the monarch that we've been used to. This is a much more sort of personal go out and meet the crowds.
And he was working the crowd, if you like, with the help of his son, Prince William, who seemed to be enjoying it and really wanting to thank people for coming out and for queuing for so long. He was almost trying to encourage them, saying, you're more than halfway now, you're nearly there.
Yeah, I think one of my colleagues sent me the timings. The King spent 18 minutes shaking hands, Prince William spent 30 minutes, over half an hour shaking hands. So they recognise the importance, I think, and for them it must be quite a thing to realise that people are willing to come and stand up to 24 hours to come and pay their respects, show their affection to the Queen, who, as we've said all this week, not just the Queen, their mother and their grandmother. So this is very personal for them.
And I think William said to one of the people in the queue that the Queen would not have believed it had she been able to see the length of the queue and this national outpouring of grief. What is happening here at the Palace today? Big crowds again here, and they've seen King Charles come and go and Prince William come and go to the Palace, and it's been quite busy here. Yeah. But what is going on inside the Palace today?
Yeah, well, the Princess of Wales, Catherine, she's in there at the moment. We saw her arrive not so long ago, and the Queen Consort. They are having lunch today with the Governor Generals from realms. So these are the nations outside of the UK who the King is now head of state of. So that's happening now, a lunch, and then this afternoon he'll have audiences conferences with some of those prime ministers, so the prime ministers of Australia, New Zealand, of Canada, so quite a big sort of state moment inside Buckingham Palace at the moment. And then, as we know, this afternoon, this evening, there will be a vigil by the Queen's 8 grandchildren. Of course, we saw it yesterday with her children, very, very moving, those 15 minutes that her children spent around the coffin standing guard. And this evening, that will be the same with the grandchildren, Princes William and Harry. We understand that they will both be in military uniform. Of course, there was this issue as to whether Prince Harry, although he'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, 10 years of service in the army, because he wasn't a working royal, technically he shouldn't be wearing military uniform at these events, but we understand that at the King's request, he will be wearing his military uniform when he takes his place around his grandmother's coffin.
All right, Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Well, officials have warned that they could be forced to close the queue to see the Queen lying in state in Westminster Hall if it reaches capacity again. Of course, thousands have been waiting patiently for many hours to pay their respects. Something like 2,000 people are joining the queue every hour, we're told. The waiting time currently around 16.5 hours, although that does come and go in terms of the length of the wait. So our correspondent Charlotte Gallagher has been at Westminster at the front of the queue.
Throughout the early hours, on one of the coldest nights since spring, a queue of thousands snaked its way through central London and beyond. Spirits are high, but temperatures have been plummeting, and some, well, are more prepared than others.
Cold, tiring, but yeah, worth it.
Hands up so they can be checked by security at the gate, please.
An army of volunteers are helping at every stage.
When we join Scouts, we have to say our promise, and part of that promise is to do our duty to the Queen, and this is our way of achieving that one last time. So it is an honour to be here, really.
And for the cold, tired and hungry, that help is appreciated.
I saw blankets and I was so cold. So cold, my body ached with shivering, so I was so grateful for it.
Some don't just come here for themselves, but for those who are no longer here. Lorraine's relatives served in the military.
It'd be nice to kind of come here and say to, you know, thank you for all your services and that, and to kind of recognise what she's done, and also for my male members in the family as well. So yeah, it's going to be a really special moment, and you know, something to remember as well. And I've actually got my brother's ashes with me today as well.
To finally see the Queen's coffin is overwhelming for many, saying thank you to a woman who is with us for so long.
Just built up, just waited for the moment to be in there, and yeah, it's just drawn, just had to go, felt just had to really. She was just beautiful and just awesome, lovely.
What an incredible out-of-body experience the whole thing is. I don't know, it's really hard to describe.
After queuing all night and paying respects to the Queen, it's time to say goodbye to new friends. But for those just joining the line, it's going to be a long, long wait. Charlotte Gallagher, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's talk more now to Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, who's here with me outside Buckingham Palace. Big crowds here, beautiful weather, and of course the focus of attention, it's been on Westminster Hall and Windsor, but also still very much on the palace. People coming to lay flowers, to lay floral tributes to remember the Queen.
Yes, as they have been at all the royal residences across the UK, but of course when people think about Buckingham Palace, probably globally, it is the building most associated with the monarch, so it's not surprising that even though she's not here, this is where people feel that they want to be. And this morning they have seen some of the royal family. There have been movements coming in and out, so they were, you know, there is always an air of anticipation, which I should say there is at the moment. The motorcycle outriders have just turned up, so we wait to see what's going to happen. But for the people that are patient, that are here, this morning they've seen Prince William, they saw the new Princess of Wales, Catherine, sort of going in, they've seen the King, so there are things happening here. But of course the focus, we should say, and across London, there are is really around Westminster. Westminster, I think, isn't it, at the moment, because of course the funeral is due to take place on Monday. So there are huge, you wander around, don't you, and there's scaffolding going up. I read some statistic about the number of miles of metal barricades that have been put up across London over the last, well, it's only 8 days, isn't it? So it is a huge logistical operation that's ongoing at the moment. And of course the King heard about some of that this morning, or this afternoon I should say, when he was at the police station in Lambeth before he went on that walkabout with his son. He was speaking to police officers, speaking to emergency workers, and hearing from them about this big logistical operation, because they are saying it's potentially the biggest international event that has happened in the UK in decades, possibly ever. And so there is a lot of preparation that needs to be done for that.
There is a sense of anticipation here. As you say, Sarah, we don't know quite what's happening or who might be coming, but lots of motorcycle outriders here, and the big crowd outside Buckingham Palace are waiting with a sense of expectation. But just ahead of Monday's state funeral, this is a mammoth organisational feat, isn't it? And it's something that has been planned for many, many years, down to the finest detail.
Absolutely down to the finest detail, and I think you can see that in the speed with which these logistics and these, the media villages have been set up, the tents have been set up. I mean, you imagine the logistics of trying to organise a line, a queue, and to marshal it and to staff it so that hundreds of thousands of people can file past the coffin as it lies in Westminster Hall. So it has been a huge, huge organisation. But I've been sort of speaking the last couple of days with police officers and with security guards, and there is just a sense of everyone feeling like they want to be involved, even if they're coming to the end of a 12-hour shift. They just want to be involved because this is such a moment in history. I should say, as we're outside Buckingham Palace, just to give you an idea of what's going on inside Buckingham Palace, we know that the King is in there with the Queen Consort. We know that the Prince and Princess of Wales are in there as well, and they are holding a lunch today for the Governors General. So these are the representatives of the monarch in countries of which he is the head of state. So they have all travelled here, and then this afternoon he will be holding audiences, his first audiences as king, with some of those prime ministers. So the Prime Minister of Australia we know is here, of New Zealand is here, of Jamaica, of Canada. So lots of state business going on behind Buckingham Palace's walls this afternoon. And then in terms of sort of the big moment, I think, of today, in the way that it was yesterday, we saw the King and his siblings mounting vigil around the coffin. Today, this evening, we will see his 8 grandchildren doing the same, and that, I think, is going to be quite a moment.
Well, there may be a moment here outside Buckingham Palace, as we were saying, a sense of anticipation. Lots of police, motorcycle outriders there. And the crowd waiting expectantly, but nothing happening at the moment. We will, of course, return you to the palace as soon as something happens. But let's cross for the time being to my colleague Karan Giannoni, who's in Westminster, where that queue, I think it's around 16 hours at the moment. It is moving, and we saw that extraordinary visit from the King and Prince William, just to sort of buoy the spirits of everyone who's been queuing for so long, Karan.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you, Ben, what a boost that has been. The King and the Prince of Wales turning up completely out of the blue and greeting so many people who were waiting over by Lambeth Bridge. I met one American tourist who'd shaken hands with the King, and I mean, he can hardly speak. He's absolutely overjoyed. He's come all the way from San Diego, and he just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and King Charles shook his hand. So he'll be telling that story for many decades to come. It was a real boost, and it's also just a gesture of the appreciation of the fact that so many people have done this long walk. 14 hours these people have been waiting and walking. They joined the queue at around midnight, so it really is up to its highest time in the terms of the people who are coming through now. But as you mentioned, the queue, if you join it now, is estimated to be at about 16.5 hours. That is really quite something, but it still is down on what we were hearing earlier. 25 hours was the estimate when we came here in the early hours of the morning. So it's actually, that is a rather more optimistic picture for people joining it right now than it has been in the last few hours. Let's talk to some of the people here in the queue. I wonder if I could talk to you. We're live on BBC News. Hi, how far have you come today?
We've come from East London.
Oh, East London.
Yes, and we've been here for 14 hours. And
14 hours.
But it's been absolutely worth it.
Really?
Yeah.
And did you, I mean, the fact that King Charles and Prince William
We missed him, unfortunately.
You missed him, but just knowing that,
Yes.
that they came and they were so grateful and they spent a lot of time talking to people.
Unfortunately, we missed him because of the
what a
other
shame.
side. Yeah.
Oh, what a shame.
Only just.
So close, yes. So I mean, you knew about the wait times when you joined.
Yes, yes.
Why was it worthwhile?
Oh, she's a great woman to our country, and we just want to come here to pay our respects. Yes.
What's it been like in the queue for 14 hours?
It's been great fun, believe it or not.
Really? You're very optimistic now. I mean,
right about 3 o'clock, I hit a low point when the traffic just stopped and we weren't moving anywhere. It's really cold, but apart from that, it's good fun.
We'll keep walking with you. Actually, we don't know.
Strangely, I've enjoyed it. So.
And you're finding that, and people are chatting to each other. You're
camaraderie, you meet people you've never met
before. So you
before,
don't know each other before today.
I've never known this person in my life, but I do now though. So.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Where have you travelled from?
Dagenham.
Dagenham.
So very local.
Quite far, just to the east of London there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And where have you come from today, sir?
Same with them.
Okay, with them.
But I met Queen back in Kenya in 1953.
Really, in 1953?
That was on her coronation when she came to Kenya. And I was 5-year-old, then 6-year-old, sorry.
And you've been on your feet for 14 hours, and
yes.
all awake all day yesterday, presumably.
True.
And how are you feeling?
Very nice, very happy.
You're happy.
It's looking amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the boost.
It's a great thing for us. My dad was in the army, British Army, and we met the Queen, and it's part of the family, you know.
What does it mean to be here in person rather than seeing it on a screen on television, for instance?
Though I'm not well, my leg is spinning, but I said I must go. Doesn't
really?
matter. Yeah.
So even if you're in pain, you've got
Still
to go. You have to do it.
Yeah.
And you're all together.
Yeah, we've all travelled together.
Yeah, how's it been overnight?
It's a very good experience.
Really?
Yes. It was a little cold at one point when we were near the river. But
I can imagine.
And we were stuck there for an hour and a half. But once we got moving, we were fine.
Right.
Yeah.
So the darkest part of the night when no one was moving must have been hard. I mean, did you think I'm going to last all the if it is going to be 14, 15
If you were wrapped up warm, you were okay, and if you didn't, you were struggled basically.
Yeah. Were you all right all night?
Yeah, it was cold all night, but I was wrapped up warm, luckily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were handing out blankets, and what about refreshments and getting out and going to the loo and sitting down if you needed to? How has that felt?
Oh, no, near the South Bank they had seats.
Really?
So people were just taking it in turns to sit down, so it wasn't a problem.
And you got wristbands, so that gave your number, so if you popped out, sat down, it was okay, you can join the queue?
Yeah, there was no issue at all, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone was very nice.
And at the moment it seems to be a little bit of a standstill. Is it quite hard? When you saw that you were so close to Westminster and then you got this snake, I mean, was that a bit demoralising?
No, this is the fact that we're actually here at this point and we saw Westminster Palace, we were like, this is it. I'm really feeling emotional now.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking to us. Thank you. So
thank you.
Best wishes to you. So you've been in the queue 14 hours?
Yes, another 14 hours.
But it's worth it?
Oh, yes, definitely.
How far have you travelled?
From Durham.
Durham, oh right, yeah. So far up northeast.
Northeast of England,
yeah. And so you left yesterday evening?
Yes.
After a day at work?
Yes.
Full day at work?
A full day at work,
A journey down from Durham and then a full 14 hours waiting in the queue?
14 hours, but it's been worth it, and lots of nice memories, met some very nice people, lots of reflection, and I think everybody's just got together and became one community during this 14-hour journey.
That's wonderful to hear. So you've been talking to everyone around you.
Yes.
I suppose it's quite a bonding experience.
Yes, very bonding, very friendly people.
That's wonderful.
It's been a pleasant journey.
Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
And all the best.
Thank you.
So as you can see, there are people still feeling so optimistic, even though it has been really hard physically, and people are telling me their hips are hurting, every part of their body is sore from standing and walking all night, but they are boosted by the sight of the Palace of Westminster, the fact that the King and the Prince of Wales have been to visit them as well, even if they didn't meet them and weren't lucky enough to be there at that exact time. But they're still going on, and they still really, really want to go in there and pay tribute in their own personal way, for whatever personal reasons they have, to the Queen lying in state in Westminster Hall.
Karen, thank you. I'm always nervous, actually, Karen, when you interview people in the queue that they're going to somehow lose their place in the queue, but they don't, do they?
Yeah. No, they don't, and that's the wristband system, Ben. You get a number on the wristband. So thankfully, you can pop out of the queue or go back a bit, and so technically you can rejoin at the number point that you have, and people are so in such good spirits here. You know, they've got to know their neighbours, so to speak, and they'll know if you came out of nowhere and jumped the queue, they know that you were with them in the queue and they let you back in where you were before you popped out, so it's all right.
Karen, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. I'm really struck by the spirits of everybody in that queue. They all think it's worth it, however long they've been queuing for, and they all seem to have found a real sense of camaraderie with their fellow queuers. Well, people have been heading to London and have been told to prepare for unprecedented demand for public transport as tens of thousands continue to arrive in London to pay their respects to the Queen. Our correspondent Jamie McCubbin has been meeting people who are making the trip to the capital.
This is an exodus.
Okay, so have we all been to the toilet?
Last call for the 12:30 to London.
Hundreds of thousands of people are on the move, all heading to the capital, all with one purpose. In Sandbach service station on the M6, we go in search of those on a pilgrimage, and we find Leslie.
There's only 2,000 people going to the funeral, and you will be one of the 2,000.
I can't believe it. I've been invited. It's still in a bit of shock. So I was on my way back from IKEA on Sunday, and all of a sudden I get this call from the Cabinet Office in the car saying that in recognition of my recent award of MBE, because I haven't been invested yet, to go to an investiture, would I like to attend the funeral on the 19th? And I just can't believe it, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm absolutely blown away.
Hello.
In Rugby, the Richmond family have taken the kids out of school early to drive to London to lay flowers for the Queen.
You're ready to go, aren't you? This is our rainbow that we made, wasn't it, for the Queen? Yeah. So you've got to hold on to that. Willow was quite affected by it. She is very taken with the Queen and her handbags and her dresses, and
you wanted the kids to be a part of this moment.
Yeah. So we made a rainbow, didn't you, of all her favourite things. So what have we got?
The crown.
And the crown and the teacups and her lovely Philip.
I'm happy and sad, and I'm excited to go and see the Queen.
I try not to cry. She was just the great nan of the nation, really. Early, I think.
Team Richmond, go, go, go!
Do a big wave. It's a long way to London.
While the Richmonds set off by car, ticket sales to London are up across the country. National Express say their London sales are up by 40% this week.
Have you brought any food?
I've got a bottle of water.
That's it?
Yeah.
Barbara from Salford is travelling alone, and she's travelling light.
How long are you planning on going for, Barbara?
As long as it takes.
But show us your bag.
This is all she's packed.
This is instead of a hotel room in London.
It is. And it's got, I think I need to go and see her. I need to walk past. I've been crying for days. Never been to London before, so it's a new adventure. If it didn't make this journey, then I'd be always wondering in the back of my mind, I should have gone, I should have done it.
We have to do today, anyway, nice.
To see the Queen?
Oh, lovely.
I need to do it, for me.
Last call for the 12:30, please.
Bye. Stay safe.
There will be grief, but for Barbara, the shared experience of heading to the capital promises more friendship and unity.
Well, here at Buckingham Palace, beautiful September sunshine, as we've been saying. Quite big crowds here as well. They've been watching the King leaving and the Prince William as well leaving, and motorcycle outriders you can just see live now who are outside Palace, and another royal motorcade just leaving the Palace, in fact. We're not quite sure who that is or where they are going, but a lot of activity for all the well-wishers here outside Buckingham Palace to keep their eye on, and they have been doing that throughout the day. But let's go live to Windsor now, because there are lots of people not only here and Westminster and all the palaces, but at Windsor in particular, and Helena Wilkinson is there for us this afternoon. Helena.
Ben, huge crowds throughout the week here in Windsor, as expected. But today, just to give you a sense of how busy it is going to be, we've spoken to officials here who tell us they are expecting up to 100,000 people here on the Long Walk just today. The position where we are, you can see Cambridge Gates behind us. The castle behind, of course. Lots of people gathered here. The reason is because this is where people have been coming throughout the week to lay flowers, to reflect, to remember, and they are doing so in huge numbers here today. Of course, on Monday afternoon, after the state funeral in London, the focal point will be here in Windsor, because this is where the Queen is going to be laid to rest. And she had an incredibly special connection with Windsor. We've been speaking to people who worked with the Queen and also locals about their thoughts.
Military Knights of Windsor were among the thousands who heard the message from Castle Hill.
This was the day the people of Windsor were formally told they had a new monarch.
To bless the Royal Princess Elizabeth II.
But the Queen's special relationship with this town began before she came to the throne.
In wishing you all good evening, I feel that I am speaking to friends and companions.
When she was 14, she made her first address from Windsor Castle to children during the Second World War.
These pictures at a national service at Windsor.
She was involved in other formal duties from a young age. But it was Windsor Great Park where she found freedom and where her love for the countryside grew. It was where she learnt to ride.
Her Majesty's left an amazing legacy across the park.
Paul Sedgwick is the Deputy Ranger of Windsor Great Park and knew the Queen well.
I think at that time there was great freedom to ride around on her horse or her pony, exploring the great expanses of the park, the ancient trees, the parkland.
In 1952, the Queen made her husband, Prince Philip, park ranger. Together, they helped protect and preserve the park.
The avenues of trees, the reintroduction of the red deer, expansion of the gardens, the formal gardens, that continues nearly 1,000 years of royal patronage at Windsor.
We know that the Queen loved Windsor Great Park. Tell us then what it was about these gardens that she loved so much.
We're in the Golden Jubilee Garden at the Savile Garden, which Her Majesty opened in July 2002. It's one of three main gardens at Windsor: the Valley Gardens, the Savile Garden and Frogmore Garden. Coming out of the gardens at Windsor was that during COVID, when Her Majesty was in residence at the castle, every Friday morning we would send a fresh bouquet of flowers from one of the three gardens to Windsor Castle for the Queen.
The Queen's legacy is all around the park, and in the town of Windsor too, her presence is felt. From the Windsor Lady's statue of Queen Elizabeth with her corgis to one of 2 Windsor Greys who draw carriages on state occasions, from the Queen's Walkway self-guided tour taking in the Windsor Guildhall and its magnificent portraits, to the books of condolence in the town's churches. At the King George VI Centre, opened by the Queen in 1958, they remember her last visit 5 years ago.
Royalty is, you know, is special to everybody throughout the world, and it's been a real honour to have lived here.
Yeah, so it was the Queen who made us come to Windsor. We've been happy here for all these years, you know, so thank you, Queen.
Here they feel a sense of pride. Their pride is shared in and around this town. Sayonara Laxton is the former mayor of Windsor.
What did Windsor mean to the Queen, and how special was that connection with her?
The Queen was the pillar of Windsor. For the people of Windsor, there is nothing else but the Queen. She was the pillar of Windsor. She brought the community together. She brought us all together. We had a meaning. It was so special to have her, to be here in the borough with her. And where else more you would want to be in the world other than in this area?
Windsor will be the Queen's final resting place. On Monday, the world will watch as the State hearse makes its way along the long walk up to the castle. One final journey. For people who live in this town, it will be a deeply personal moment, saying goodbye to the Queen, who was their neighbour and part of their community. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News, Windsor. And Ben, let me just show you the route that I just mentioned that the State hearse will be taking on Monday afternoon. The State funeral in central London. The Queen's State hearse will come here to the Long Walk in the Great Park, which the Queen loved. It will be, if you look down the Long Walk there, about a mile down. That is where the State hearse will start its final journey up along the Long Walk past tens of thousands of people who are expected to line either side. It will be a huge military procession as well. And the State hearse will then make its way up along the walk, up here to where we are, and then through Cambridge gates, which of course will be open, make its way past an array of flowers that have been left by members of the public and over the last days been taken by staff to the other side, very carefully laid out. And then there will be the committal service at 4 o'clock on Monday afternoon in St George's Chapel, and a bit later on in the evening a private service with members of the royal family when the Queen will be buried, laid to rest next to her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh.
Helena, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's talk more about the queue now, with a capital T and a capital Q. Around 2,000 people an hour currently joining the queue in Southwark Park to see the Queen lying in state with less than 48 hours until the vigil ends. The government tracker is advising people will face a very long wait. I think the latest was around 16 hours. It's been longer than that. At one stage it was 25 hours, would you believe? But let's join my colleague Lauren Moss, who's at the back of the queue, and nobody seems daunted by the length of the queue, whether it's 16 hours or 24 hours. They don't really care. They just want to be there, don't they?
Absolutely, Ben. And you know, I've been here since early this morning when the queue lengths were estimated to be, as you just said, around 24 to 25 hours. Now they have dropped somewhat. And actually, I can say that, you know, the queue is moving really quite well at the moment. You know, sometimes you get that bit of a lull when everyone's at a standstill, but lots of people walking through from Zone 1 in Southwark Park, crossing over there, heading it towards Bermondsey and the Thames Path, and making their way down to Tower Bridge and so on. But as you can see from the sign behind me as well, they are being very well warned about what's ahead, and it could be a 16.5-hour wait. In fact, some people I met this morning at around 6 o'clock this morning have just made it to Waterloo Bridge, which is about 3 miles from here. So that sort of gives you a rough estimate about how long it's taking to then do the next 2 miles after that and the final few miles queuing before getting into Westminster Hall. But it's a group of people who are unperturbed by the delay have joined me now. Can I just get all of your names? You guys are a family.
Well, 3 of us.
I'm a stray. So you're a stray.
We
so
picked her up on the way.
Okay. Well, you've only just joined the queue, and it seems like you've known each other for ages.
Yeah. I'm Tom. That's Megan. That's Missy.
Hi, I'm Ayolette. Okay.
We just flew in this morning from Florida.
Wow. Specifically for this, or did you have a trip planned?
No. We 10 years ago, I said to them, when the Queen passes, we will come over to pay our respects. So we flew over. We got here this morning, got on the tube, came here, and we haven't stopped walking since we got off the airplane.
Wow, how are you feeling? I'm trying to work out the time difference in my head. You're quite jet lagged.
5 hours.
Okay.
We've been up for a few days now.
Yeah.
Okay, so 16.5 hours until you might get to Westminster Hall. How have you packed? Where is all your luggage? Is this what you travelled with?
Go Gators.
Go Gators, we have snacks.
Yeah, University of Florida, go Gators. We have snacks and drinks.
Where have you come from? Are you going to? Have they shown you up?
I live here in London, and I was like, it's a lovely afternoon. I have nothing better to do with my life. Why not? And I have only packed a single Red Bull, and I'm here to stay.
Oh, well, I think it's fantastic that you've made friends so early, because now they can look after you for the rest of the trip. But obviously, you know, it's great seeing everybody, you know, making friends and that camaraderie and sharing things together. But it's obviously a very serious reason of why you've wanted to come here in a very sombre event. And everybody is sharing their personal stories about that, and I'm really struck by that you've come so far. I haven't met anybody who's come from so far as yourselves.
We've had such respect for the Queen forever, and we visited here several times, and both of my daughters, they're twins by the way, but both of them have always just been completely enamored with the royal family. And we have such respect for Her Majesty that we wanted just to come and pay our respects.
What do you think it is then about the royal family that makes you have that devotion, that you wanted to make this huge journey?
I think the history has a lot to do with it, but I think also just the way Queen Elizabeth dedicated her entire life to just the people. She gave, she did everything for everyone else except herself, and that's something to admire.
And how do you think then you'll feel when you finally finish the walk inside and you're standing there inside Westminster Hall? Can you sort of think ahead to that?
I think for sure it'll be a whirlwind of emotions. I'm sure. We've been talking about that too. How are we going to react? But I think it'll be emotional. It'll be emotional.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us. Thank you as well. I hope the rest of your walk goes okay and stick together.
We will.
And that's pretty much a sense of everything I'm getting with everybody here that I've spoken to over the last few hours. Very different people, very different stories, but they have one shared objective, and that is to reach Westminster Hall so they can pay their respects to Queen Elizabeth lying in state.
Lauren, thank you. It really is extraordinary, isn't it? People are coming not only from all around the United Kingdom, but also from all around the world, as your guest just illustrated very well. Well, the Metropolitan Police have called the Queen's funeral on Monday their largest ever operation, the like of which is probably never going to be seen again, just in terms of the policing, the scale of it. And I've been talking to General Sir Richard Barrons, the former head of the UK's Joint Forces Command. Now, he's been talking to me about the importance of the relationship, in particular, between the monarch and the late Queen Elizabeth and the armed forces.
As a serving military officer, it's essential that you accept civil control of the military. It's a very bad idea if the military decide on which wars to have, but you want to be above the political day-to-day fray. So the constitutional link between the armed forces and their commander-in-chief, the sovereign, is really important to how the armed forces see themselves as not part of politics and servants of the nation.
We're just seeing some pictures of the Queen unveiling a bust. Now, I think you've got an extraordinary story about this, because it all went a little bit wrong, didn't it?
Well, actually, on the day, it turned out well, but only just. So this was the unveiling of a bust of Her Majesty, who had served as the Captain General of the Honourable Artillery Company, the oldest regiment in the British Army, and she came to visit the regiment at its home in the City of London. And she came to unveil a bust, which at that stage had not been cast in bronze, and it is now, and it's magnificent. And rather unfortunately, in the rehearsal of this unveiling, a little bit of over-exuberance from the soldiers who were removing the cover over the statue, pulled it off the plinth, and it fell on the ground and broke. The artist was on hand, saw this, and then with a lot of help, and worked at great speed to repair it just in time and repaint it and get it back on the plinth. But because we didn't know quite what we were going to see when the cover came off, when Her Majesty removed the cover, I thought it prudent to tell her what had happened and cross every finger and toe that we had. And we were, after all, in front of 1,000 devoted followers of the Honourable Artillery Company. Fortunately, when it was unveiled, it was in one piece, and we got away with it. And the Queen found the whole thing, frankly, hilarious. But because we'd got it right, because we'd fixed it, and I think if we hadn't fixed it, we would have had a dreadful day and all rightly been sacked. But on the day, it worked out.
We've all been reflecting in the last few days on what the Queen and her long reign meant for this country. We've seen this extraordinary outpouring of grief, hadn't we? These incredible queues to see the coffin lying in state at Westminster Hall. What are your own personal reflections on her as a Queen and what she meant for this country?
Well, I think it's profoundly important, frankly, to everybody in the armed forces that we recognise that we had the same commander-in-chief for 70 years, and she was the constitutional and ceremonial and official head of the armed forces, and became an institution. And frankly, difficult for a while to imagine her not being there. But in fact, the armed forces will understand that their role in national life is to provide a degree of safety and continuity, as it is for the monarch. And so the allegiance transfers instantly and automatically to the new sovereign, and we'll all march on into what looks like quite a difficult world. And the armed forces will reflect that 3 times as many people as are in the armed forces are queuing to have their few moments in front of Her Majesty's coffin. And so it's not just the armed forces that think this is a really important national moment.
General Sir Richard Barron's there talking to me a little bit earlier on. Let's just show you the scene live now in Westminster Hall as people continue to file past the Queen's coffin after that very, very long queue, which at one stage has been up to 25 hours, now down to, we think, about 16 hours. And later on this evening, the late Queen's grandchildren will be standing vigil by the coffin. Prince William at the head of it, Prince Harry at the foot of it, and the significance is that Prince Harry has been given special dispensation to wear military uniform by King Charles III, and we were just hearing actually in that interview the importance of uniform to the Queen. And Prince Harry, who has stepped back from life as a working royal, has not been wearing military uniform, but for this standing at the coffin in that vigil tonight, he will be wearing uniform. Let's get the very latest on the queue and the length of it, and the people who have been coming out, having been to pay their respects to... let's just actually show you the scene now, because here at Buckingham Palace, another royal motorcade. I think that was the Queen Consort actually just leaving. We've had cars coming in and going out of Buckingham Palace all day. We've seen the King going in and out of the palace. We've seen Prince William, and there's a big cheer because the crowds here love it when they see one of the members of the royal family going past, and they are gathered in big numbers here in the sunshine outside Buckingham Palace. But let's go back to Karen Giannoni, who's at Westminster. Karen.
Yeah, Ben, it was exactly the same when King Charles left Lambeth Bridge, and after his little walkabout that he did there, which surprised so many people, drove past here along Millbank by the Houses of Parliament. A huge cheer went up. It really boosted everybody who was there to see King Charles and Prince William turn up, and even just them going past in their cars was such an event for everybody. And you can see that the people filing past behind me still going strong. They have been in the queue for about 14 hours. They joined around midnight, so more than 14 hours now. And although they are in really good spirits, the sun is out, they are nearing the end of that long journey. The toll on them is definitely clear. Lots of people are saying they're aching and various other complaints. It must be so hard to be on your feet for so long. It is really some of the limits of human endurance for some people who have been in very cold conditions overnight, very, very chilly September night. But obviously their spirits and their drive to go into Westminster Hall is keeping them going really strong, and they're all still so cheerful. But there have been some medical incidents, and there are so many volunteers from St John Ambulance, among others, working here to keep people safe, to treat them if necessary. Let's talk to the Chief Commissioner of St John Ambulance, Anne Cable, who I'm pleased to say can speak to us now. Anne Cable, just tell us how much of a force you are out in helping all the people here and in other parts of London and Windsor too.
Absolutely. We've got a few hundred out today in London, but we've also got several hundred out and about, as you say, at other events around the country. And over Monday, we shall have around about 1,000 people out helping with the events.
Anne, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to throw right back to Buckingham Palace because the Wessexes, I believe, are going past and coming out of Buckingham Palace. We'll be right back to you.
Karen, thank you. Yes, the Earl of Wessex, Prince Edward, and the Countess of Wessex have just come through the gates of Buckingham Palace there in beautiful afternoon sunshine to to greet some of the well-wishers who are here. And it's really been a day of royal walkabouts. We had King Charles and Prince William, of course, meeting some of those in the queue, waiting in that queue to get into Westminster Hall. But now the Earl and Countess of Wessex coming to meet the crowds just outside the gates of Buckingham Palace.
So Prince Edward was the Queen's youngest son. And such a moving, poignant moment, I think, last night in the stillness of Westminster Hall when he and his brother, Prince Andrew, King Charles and Princess Anne took their places by the coffin and mounted a vigil for 15 minutes. A reminder, isn't it, that it's such a private event for them, a personal event for them, the loss of their mother. But clearly, I think we've heard in the statements that have been released from members of the royal family that they are gaining much comfort and much solace from the groundswell of affection that there clearly is for their mother.
And the Countess of Wessex, very close to the late Queen Elizabeth.
Very close, very close. I think that was genuinely recognised that apparently she called her mama, had a very close relationship with her. I'm reminded there was the photograph that was taken of Philip and the Queen that was released around the time of his death in April last year. That had been taken by the Countess of Wessex, a very private moment at Balmoral. I think just a reminder of how much private time the family spent together in their royal residences. Last Saturday it was that the family members came out from those gates of Balmoral for their first walkabout after they'd attended a service at the nearby Crathy Kirk. And again, as they are now, taking time to speak to people, to read those tributes, to see the tributes, to listen to what people have got to say, and for them, a time to say thank you.
Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, joining me here outside Buckingham Palace as we watch the Earl of Wessex and the Countess of Wessex greeting the crowds here. And Sarah, it's really been a day of royal walkabouts, hasn't it? The King, Prince William, meeting people queuing up, and in fact the last few days really we've seen. Is this a new, more informal style, do you think, where the royal family really want to get amongst the crowds and talk to as many of them as they can, shake as many hands as they can?
Well, I think it's been certainly led by the King. That was the first one. We were here at Buckingham Palace, I think, when he arrived back from Balmoral. And I don't think anybody was expecting, bearing in mind he'd so recently lost his mother, for him to leave the vehicle, the state vehicle, and come and shake hands, as the Countess of Wessex we see here doing now for the people that had waited outside Buckingham Palace. And I think, in a sense, that set the tone. And not long afterwards, of course, we saw Princes William and Harry and their spouses, Catherine and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, doing the same in Windsor. So it's, like we say, it's been such an outpouring. There are so many people that are travelling, not just here to London, but to Windsor, to Balmoral, to Edinburgh, to Cardiff yesterday, didn't we? We saw the new King again going on another walkabout, shaking hands, and it's obviously very important to them to give a public thank you back, as we say, for the level of affection that they're being shown from the public, and it seems to be helping them at what is a very difficult time.
It's a strange time, isn't it? Because these people who have come to the palace and to other palaces and to Westminster Hall, full of grief, but also celebrating the long life of the Queen. And the royal family, I suppose, feeling those mixed emotions too, grief and mourning, but also a sense of wonderment at the length of life and the length of the reign of the late Queen.
Absolutely. And of course we're looking at the Earl and Countess of Wessex here today, but in not too long now, their children, who are still relatively young, Lady Louise and Viscount Severn. They will be among the 8 grandchildren who will be standing around the coffin in Westminster Hall this evening, mounting a vigil. And our understanding being that that was something the grandchildren wanted very much to do, because one can imagine it must be hugely difficult to have a public show of grief like that, but as we say, it's something they wanted to do. And again, I think that will be another powerful moment in a few days, which have seen so many powerful moments.
Let's just listen in as the Earl of Wessex talks to some of the well-wishers here outside Buckingham Palace.
Birmingham and Manchester. So just there. You're very kind. Thank you very much indeed. Brilliant. Anyway, well, thank you very much for your support. Thank you for coming all this way. It's very much appreciated. I know that my mother will really appreciate all this fantastic support. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much.
What's something?
The royal couple are just behind us now as we look out onto a beautiful scene at Buckingham Palace. Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, with me. I mean, the weather couldn't be better today, could it? The rain has not only held off, but actually we got completely blue skies and glorious September sunshine for all the events we've seen today. Not only this walkabout by the Wessexes, but earlier on King Charles, Prince William as well.
Buckingham Palace really couldn't look better, could it? And again, I think especially for all those people that have either travelled here to Buckingham Palace or travelled to the Kew, it's certainly welcome for them that the weather is so good, because clearly they are happy to spend hours either being here when the royals are here. Nobody knew that they were going to turn up, so this will be a surprise to them. I'm sure a very pleasant surprise. But yeah, people, even in the queue, I haven't heard one person saying that it wasn't worth waiting the hours that they've had to wait in order to pay their respects. And of course, it is now only 2 days until the Queen's funeral, which, as we've been hearing, is due to be one of the largest, if not the largest, international event that this country has seen, certainly for decades, if not forever. And there is a huge logistical exercise in planning that's going on at the moment. You can see all the metal barriers and things out here now, but this is the case across the entire route that cortege procession is going to take on Monday, all around Westminster Abbey, all around the Palace of Westminster, all the way along the South Bank, to allow those mourners to attend the lying in state at Westminster Hall. It is a huge, huge operation.
And all the details of that planned so meticulously over many years. But I suppose the one thing nobody could have planned for was this huge outpouring of national grief, and you know, just the length of the queue, the number of people who want to join that queue has, I think, taken people by surprise, perhaps. Planners, organisers, maybe even the royal family, we don't know. But I mean, Prince William, we heard earlier on talking to some of those who were queuing, he said the Queen would never have believed this.
Well, of course, the last member of the royal family to lie in state was Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And back then in 2002, some 200,000 people queued up to pay their respects to her. And so I think it would have been understood that there would be hundreds of thousands that would have wanted to have seen the Queen. But honestly, I don't think anything can prepare you for seeing the pictures of so many people. it is really quite incredible. And I think, as we've been saying, and as you can see, and you can see with the Earl and Countess of Wessex saying thank you to the people as they go along, thank you for coming down, thank you for paying your respects, that it will be a comfort to those family members, that an acknowledgement that the Queen was held in such great regard. I mean, we must say that the last time we were here for a big royal weekend was the Platinum Jubilee weekend, and there again, thankfully the Queen was alive to see for herself the wave of affection that there clearly was towards her. And goodness me, that was only 3 months ago.
And as we watch the Earl and Countess of Wessex greeting the well-wishers here outside Buckingham Palace in that beautiful, bright sunshine. Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, I suppose, the King has begun his reign. He's clearly working very hard. He's been travelling to all the home nations, meeting lots of people already, and he will need the support and the help of other members of the royal family, like the Wessexes, as he goes forward with his reign.
Absolutely. We should say that the King and the Queen Consort have been holding a lunch in Buckingham Palace this lunchtime, and this is for the Governors General from the realms. Of course, the King is not just head of state here in the UK, but in 14 other countries around the world, and so today really is a chance he will have met them, of course, before, but he has now a new relationship with them because he is the King, and this afternoon he will be holding his first audiences as King with Prime Ministers from some of those countries, so from Australia, from New Zealand, from Jamaica. So it's just a reminder there, isn't it, that this is not just a UK story and how it affects us in the United Kingdom. This is very much a global story and a global shift.
Prince Edward, who, as you were saying, we saw standing vigil last night at the coffin in Westminster Hall, but tonight it's the turn of the grandchildren, the 8 grandchildren, Sarah, including Prince Harry, who is going to be wearing military uniform.
Yeah, so let's just take you through that. And we haven't got exact timings at the moment, but we know that Prince William, the Prince of Wales, he will stand at the head of the Queen's coffin in Westminster Hall, and his brother, Prince Harry, will stand at the foot. William will be flanked by Princess Anne's 2 children, so that's Zara Tindall and Peter Phillips, and then next to Harry, the Duke of York's daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, and situated in the middle, the Earl and Countess of Wessex's 2 children, Lady Louise and Viscount Severn. And once again, they are young, but we understand that it was their decision. It was all of their collective decision that they very much wanted to take part.
Big moment for them.
Huge moment for them, potentially overwhelming moment for them, but clearly it's something that they wanted to do. And you mentioned the uniform. All of the grandchildren will wear morning coats or dark formal wear, except for the King's son. And why is this an issue? Why are we talking about it? Well, because despite his 10 years service in the army, his 2 tours of Afghanistan, Prince Harry hadn't been expected to wear military uniform at any of these ceremonial events because he's no longer a working royal. But the palace made clear yesterday that at the King's request for this vigil, both William and Harry will be in military uniform. So they will stand there for 15 minutes along with the other grandchildren in the stillness of Westminster Hall. And just as it was when we saw Prince Edward there last night taking his place by the coffin, I think it will be a very, very powerful moment.
So Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex and the Countess of Wessex meeting well-wishers outside Buckingham Palace, and they have really taken their time, just as King Charles did earlier on when he was meeting people who were queuing up to see the late Queen lying in state, and Prince William, who was alongside him, meeting those people in the queue. And now it's been the turn of the Earl of Wessex and the Countess of Wessex, and they're really, Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, really taking their time. I mean, all these royal walkabouts, they're not just a couple of minutes, are they? They tend to be 15, 20 minutes, maybe even half an hour sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, the Queen, didn't she? She always said she had to be seen to be believed, and this is what the family are carrying on, that they want to be able to be seen to acknowledge the efforts that all these people have made to come out and pay tribute to their mother or their grandmother. And yeah, it can't be rushed. It absolutely can't be rushed, because there are literally so many people that they want to move along the line.
You can't shake everybody's hand, but you always feel a bit sorry for the people who are stretching out their hands who don't quite get that handshake.
I'm just wondering whether we're coming to an end now. Is that the Countess going towards the waiting vehicle? Or maybe not. Carrying on a little bit longer. It is a lovely moment, isn't it, for the crowds who won't have expected to see, I think, any members of the royal family in person. But, as we say, will have travelled from all over the United Kingdom, all over the world. I think you go in that crowd there, and I guarantee that within about 3 people, you'll have somebody who's come from Canada, somebody who's come from Australia, as well as people who've come from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland.
Oh, we have to call to get my friend from the Amazon. She's flown in. Thank you. Where are you going?
It's in the back. It's all detailed. That's really
Thank you very much.
God bless you.
Countess of Wessex there. Not sure if that walkabout is coming to an end. Looks like perhaps it is. It's been quite a lengthy one, as we've been discussing. The Earl and Countess of Wessex meeting the crowds outside Buckingham Palace, thanking them for coming, thanking them for their flowers, for their good wishes. Just as King Charles earlier and Prince William, the Prince of Wales, were thanking all those, or at least some of those, who were queuing in that very long queue along the River Thames to pay their respects at the coffin of the late Queen Elizabeth. And Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, who's with me, watching these scenes just behind us here at Buckingham Palace.
I've been past a couple of times to notice that.
It's almost like the royal family are sort of taking it in turns today to do their walkabouts.
It's a busy day. It is a busy day, and the King is inside carrying out his new kingly duties. So he's meeting with prime ministers from the realms, the countries of which he is now king. And as you say, at the moment, leaving his younger brother and sister-in-law to meet the public on his behalf and accept those thanks and condolences. But as you say, earlier on today, he was out himself, spending around 20 minutes or so chatting to people who've been queuing up all night, waiting to enter Westminster Hall to see the Queen lying in state, and was joined by his son, the heir to the throne, Prince William, who joined him as well. These aren't necessarily scheduled. We don't know about them. The public certainly don't know about them. But clearly it's a very valuable way that they can show their appreciation for the public, showing their affection for their mother, their grandmother.
Last night, you put the call on. Yes. So are you all planning to stay here now?
Yeah, till Monday.
Till Monday?
Yeah, after my
Right, so very good. So when did you leave the Blues?
1978.
Right.
Yeah, I was mounted, not mounted, I was armoured, not on the mountainside.
Right, okay. You avoided that Blues?
Yeah, it was that journey, yeah.
Well, there was slightly more of you in those days, so you probably could. Well, so very good. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. No, but thank you for your support. Have you been to Green Park already? We
have, yeah.
So I'm told it's quite amazing number of flowers.
Thank you
very much. You're very kind. Where have you come from? Hertfordshire? Whereabouts in Hertfordshire? Wellington. Yep. Is it both?
Yeah.
And you've been to Green Park already?
Yes, we have. We're Selby, New York.
Selby, really?
Of Wessex there, meeting dozens and dozens of the people who've come to Buckingham Palace to bring floral tributes to remember the Queen, and the Earl and Countess just really wanting to thank everybody who's come here in the same way that King Charles earlier and Prince William, the Prince of Wales, wanted to thank people in the queue for Westminster Hall. Of course, for the royal family, it's going to become very busy in the next couple of days. The state funeral, of course, on Monday, and tomorrow a huge reception, possibly the biggest reception in terms of world leaders who will be gathered here at Buckingham Palace. It'll be prime ministers, presidents, heads of state, the Japanese emperor, a really extraordinary array of world leaders who will be in Buckingham Palace tomorrow, hosted by working members of the royal family, King Charles, the Queen Consort, and other members of the royal family who will be hosting that very important reception tomorrow. President Biden here at Buckingham Palace, President Macron of France. Really, royal commentators saying there won't have been a gathering quite like it inside Buckingham Palace, perhaps ever. So perhaps today is a good day for the royal family to meet many of the people who've come to London. We've been seeing people who've travelled from the United States, travelled from all over the world to be here, and from all corners of the United Kingdom as well. They've come to Windsor, they've come to Buckingham Palace, they've come to Westminster Hall, and really just a chance for the Wessexes now, the latest members of the royal family, to say thank you. Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, as we watch, it's striking to me how comfortable the royal family are actually, just in these conversations. Charles, William, earlier on, now the Wessexes, just comfortable having chats with people, you know, shaking hands and then having conversations.
Well, it is what they do.
It's true.
It is what they do day in, day out. We don't feature all of the engagements that they go to each year, but you know, they are travelling around. The Earl and Countess of Wessex will be going around the country hundreds of times a year, meeting people. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, of course, we know, over 300 engagements a year. So this is what they do. This personal connection with the public is very, very important to them. We know that over the last, half an hour now, I think they've been meeting people, that the Earl of Wessex has told them that they appreciate, that the Queen would have appreciated the number of people paying respects, and that he has told somebody in the crowd, I know that my mother would have really appreciated this fantastic support. So nice words, nice for them to be able to tell the crowd, you know, how much the Queen would have appreciated this moment as well. And of course, in 2 days' time, we're saying that this is a good day for this to happen, because in 2 days' time, the atmosphere is going to be very, very different. Yes, crowds will line the Mall as they are doing today, but it will be a much more sombre occasion, because after the funeral service at Westminster Abbey, the Queen's procession, the coffin will process down the Mall. It will go past Buckingham Palace and along to Wellington Arch before it makes its final journey via the State Hearse to Windsor. So, if you like, there's a happy atmosphere today. It will be very different, I think, in 2 days' time.
And important in a sense for the royal family in this television age, not just to be seen on television, but to meet people in the flesh, to meet their subject in the flesh, to shake hands, literally, and to talk to people.
Well, they've said, haven't they, that they gain comfort from it as well. So I think it's a two-way street. Yes, it's nice for the public, but it's nice for them as well to have that sort of personal connection with people, because, you know, the Queen, she was head of the nation, but she was also very personal to them. And so this is the time for them to share that grief with members of the public.
Well, if you're just joining us, the Earl of Wessex and the Countess of Wessex on a walkabout here outside Buckingham Palace, and they've been meeting people who have come to mourn the late Queen Elizabeth for around, I think, 25 minutes now, getting on for half an hour. This isn't just a quick meet and greet, it's probably meeting as many of the several thousand people who are here outside the palace as they possibly can, just in the way that earlier on we saw King Charles and Prince William, the Prince of Wales, meeting as many people as they could who were queuing along the River Thames on the Albert Embankment, waiting in that very, very long queue to get to Westminster Hall to see the Queen's coffin, to pay their final respects to Her Majesty. And Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, is with me at Buckingham Palace. It really has been an extraordinary outpouring of national grief, hasn't it? And I suppose nobody knew quite what to expect at the end of such a long reign.
And it's worth bearing in mind, isn't it, when we look at these pictures, that none of these people are here because they thought they would get to shake the hands of the Earl and Countess of Wessex today. They were just here. When I arrived sort of 3 or 4 hours ago, it was packed in front of Buckingham Palace, just as it is in the centre of next to Westminster. People feeling that they just want to come. It's a Saturday, of course there's no school today, for lots of people no work today, and so many people have felt, well, I just want to come and be in the centre of London, be in those places that we associate with the monarch, with the Queen. And one thinks that when they look at Buckingham Palace, and every time I look at that empty balcony, you remember all of the times that she stood there waving to the nation at moments of sort of big national celebration and, you know, sadness as well. But, you know, she was there, so it's understandable, I think, that so many people would want to come and just be here to take all of this in. It's quite extraordinary, I think, being in London at the moment, as I'm sure it is being in Windsor, in Scotland outside the Palace of Holyrood House, in Balmoral, all of these places that have a bit of a sort of personal connection with the Queen that people are being drawn to at the moment. So what we think about half an hour that the Earl and Countess of Wessex have been making their way up the Mall. Just meeting some of those people that have just decided to come down there. Countess of Wessex having a word with a security guard. This earlier today, the King was speaking to police officers and emergency service workers, just getting a feel for the huge operation that is going on and has been going on in London ever since the death of the Queen was announced. The Countess just acknowledging there, so the marshals, there are hundreds if not thousands of marshals in the centre of London at the moment, just making sure that these huge crowds that have built up are manageable.
You're really British. Very kind. Thank you very much indeed. So have you been to Green Park yet, or you going home? So just roll the flowers for them? Yeah. Then whereabouts do you come from? South London. Yeah, whereabouts? Dulwich. Dulwich? Hi, Princess. Thank you for doing that. Thank you. Hello there. Hello. Hello. Thank you for coming all the way. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your support. Thank you very much.
Mutual thanks, really, isn't it? It's the royal family thanking those who've come, and the crowds thanking the royal family to come to talk to them and shake their hands. These pictures of the Wessexes greeting so many people outside Buckingham Palace. Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent. Let's just reflect for a moment on the first few days of King Charles's reign, and he seemed very keen, didn't he, to go to all the nations of the United Kingdom to talk to as many people as he could, to meet crowds in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, as well as in England, to meet faith leaders, to meet political leaders as well.
I mean, that was always part of the plan, to make sure that the new king could go to each of the four nations, a very important part of the plan, and those have been, and he has been greeted, you know, scenes like this everywhere that he's been to with sort of well-wishers. So yeah, absolutely, it has been a very, very busy week. The Queen's death was announced, on Thursday in Balmoral, and the King and the Queen Consort had the night in Balmoral, but then flew down immediately from London, and that's when it started. So really the last week for him, hasn't it, and for the rest of the family, has been getting used to this new role, establishing himself as king, whilst at the same time grieving for his mother.
Yeah, and this, this is children and grandchildren grieving mother and grandmother.
Absolutely, and again bring us back to that vigil that will be held this evening with the 8 grandchildren. The Earl and Countess of Wessex's children, still relatively young, but wanted to take their place around the coffin in Westminster Hall, and that will happen this evening. They will mount a vigil along with Princes William and Harry, Princess Eugenie and Beatrice, and Zara Tindall and Peter Phillips, and for 15 minutes they will do what their parents did last night, which is just stand guard for 15 minutes and pay their own, we say private tributes, but it's in a very, very public arena, isn't it? But it's what they wanted to do.
Sarah Campbell, our royal correspondent, with me here at Buckingham Palace. Many thanks indeed, as we were watching the Wessexes meeting many of the people gathered outside Buckingham Palace here where we are this afternoon. Well, earlier King Charles and the Prince of Wales went to chat to people queuing here in London to see the Queen's lying in state. They thanked people for waiting through the night to get into Westminster Hall before the state funeral on Monday. Last night, the King, the Princess Royal, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward held a silent vigil by their mother's coffin. Now, the Queen's 8 grandchildren, including Princes William and Harry, will hold their own vigil later on today, as Sarah's been telling us. Paul Adams has this report.
At Lambeth Bridge this morning, a warm welcome for the King and his eldest son, the new Prince of Wales. The two mingled with those waiting to pay respects to the Queen.
30 hours, no sleep.
Did you 30 hours?
Yeah.
Because you're very good on 30 hours.
These walkabouts already a hallmark of the new King's reign. It's here that he seems to be most relaxed and happy.
3 cheers for His Majesty!
Not far away, the ritual continues. The third full day on which members of the public from far and wide have come to offer thanks and say goodbye. These people endured a long, cold night for the chance of a few brief moments. It's quiet, respectful. The atmosphere of reverence only punctuated briefly last night as a man tried to rush the coffin and was wrestled to the ground. Earlier, the late Queen's 4 children, all in uniform, mounted their own vigil. Tonight it'll be the turn of her 8 grandchildren, very public displays of private grief.
How humbling is that?
You got to see the whole family. It was incredible, absolutely amazing.
No, it was a very emotional moment, and that just added to the whole afternoon, evening. Unbelievable.
She's the only female we've ever had and will ever have on our planet that is known by everybody in the world, from the smallest island to the largest area on our planet. No, she's just the only one, our Queen. And that to me fills me with, I don't know, just immense pride.
And with each passing day, more signs of round-the-clock preparations. This was Windsor in the early hours of the morning. Grenadier Guards accompanying the hearse that will carry the Queen's coffin back to the castle for Monday's final ceremonies. At Windsor's Victoria Barracks, representatives of all 3 services getting ready for something they, and most of us, have not seen before.
Plenty of preparation and planning's gone into this, clearly, to make sure the late Majesty Queen Elizabeth has the best that we can give her, and everything went exactly to plan, to be honest. Apart from the weather this morning being a bit nippy, it's all good. Yeah.
Back at Westminster Hall, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was among world leaders paying respects this morning. Politicians, past and present, are all taking their turns. For 70 years, people came to London to see the Queen. They're still doing it today. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Well, lots of world leaders, of course, gathering here for the state funeral on Monday. China, we're hearing, has decided to send the country's Vice President Wang Qishan to the funeral of Queen Elizabeth on Monday. That decision was made despite what was seen as a snub delivered to the Chinese delegation that wanted to attend the Queen's lying in state. They were banned from going to that because the Chinese government had sanctioned several British members of Parliament over their comments about the treatment of the Uyghurs. Meanwhile, human rights groups have criticised the decision to invite the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to Queen Elizabeth's funeral. Western intelligence agencies have said that in all probability Mohammed bin Salman did order the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018, which he has denied. We have been hearing he is not actually coming to the funeral itself. And also let me just update you, Downing Street is saying that the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, will not now be holding talks with President Joe Biden tomorrow. There's a full bilateral meeting taking place at the UN General Assembly on Wednesday, but there is going to be a reception of all the world leaders who are going to the funeral here at Buckingham Palace tomorrow. Prime ministers, presidents, heads of state, and that is going to be quite a gathering here at Buckingham Palace. All right, let's get the latest on the queue. We are hearing it still about 16 hours, I think, queuing time to get to see the Queen's coffin lying in state. Let's go to Catty Kay, who's at Westminster for us. Catty.
Ben, thank you. Yeah, I've just been speaking to people in the queue. You're talking about the dignitaries, Ben. These are, of course, the members of the public who've been queuing all night. The ones I spoke to said it had been a very chilly night, but they were still in good spirits. But just in case, I don't know if you can see it behind me, there are members of the security groups there handing out sweets to people in the public now, little bits of butterscotch, because they're worried about people's blood sugar level dropping after they've been in the queue for such a long time overnight. But the atmosphere, I have to say, given that they've been standing in line for about 14 or 15 hours, is still very good indeed. Let's speak to Charles Anson. He joins me now. He was the former press secretary to the Queen between 1990 and 1997. I want to talk about your time with the Queen, Charles. But first of all, tell me about what you make of all of the members of the royal family who've been so visible and going to see members of the public. We've just seen the Earl and Countess of Wessex. We saw, of course, King Charles, Prince William. It seems that every day members of the royal family are making a real point of going on these little walkabout tours, talking to the public. Am I reading the palace tea leaves too much, or is this the monarchy showing, look, we're here, we're visible, we're out speaking to the people?
Well, I think actually the walkabout has been a feature of monarchical life really since quite early in the Queen's reign. And it came originally, the idea, from Australia. The Aborigines like to go walkabout to see their family, see their friends. And this was picked up by politicians in Australia. And then when the Queen and Prince Philip went there, they liked the idea of being able to talk much more informally to people. And it was an occasional thing then. Now it's very much built into virtually every royal programme, because I think what you've got in the 21st century is a much more participative monarchy. We live in a social media age, everything's out there, and the monarchy needs to be engaged in the same way as other groups do in society, and as politicians have to do the whole time. But it's definitely a feature of modern monarchy, and the Queen, even with her quite shy nature, took to this because it was an opportunity to talk to people in an unvarnished way, face to face in a crowd, informally, as part of the day's business. Nothing sort of planned or very formal, just the spontaneous conversation.
That's interesting, Charles. So you got the impression when you were working with the Queen that she enjoyed those. I mean, I could imagine you're doing these rope lines and you're speaking to members of the public and you get 2 or 3 minutes and you don't actually get to involve in a substantive conversation. You're on your feet, but you're suggesting that she enjoyed it. I
think she enjoys it in the same way, Catty, that the Queen really, again, right from the beginning of her 70 years on the throne and right throughout it, however busy she was, opened some of the letters from the public herself each morning, once they'd been cleared by security and so on. But she literally opened the envelope, read the letters in a random way and pick up on things right in the margin. And of course, that often led to action. And I think that ability and skill and enjoyment of exchanging with people, is something that is important for the modern monarchy, but it's also can be exhilarating and quite moving if it's a story of difficulty that some very modest, humble person is telling the Queen, and it's then moved forward quite often, and you get a good result from it. But it's a very important part of it, and I think to be honest, for the younger members of the royal family to be able to go on walkabout, as you've just seen this afternoon with the Earl and Countess of Wessex, it's a balm for grief to be able to talk to people who are quite clear, very supportive of this institution of the monarchy, and the fact that it's not democratic in its origins, far from it, but it's actually seems to be a sort of democratic service that's absolutely enormous.
You're right to remind us of their personal grief, of course, because so much of this is ceremonial, but they are a family who have just lost their mother or their grandmother. And it is a lovely thing when you've lost an elderly parent, mine died last year, to have people come to you and tell you they meant so much to me. I'm sure that that's something that they will treasure on these walkabouts. Let's talk about your time with the Queen. It was during the 1990s. It was, of course, famously the time when she referred to her annus horribilis. How did she... When you were with her and you watched her, how did she get through those difficult times for her family?
Well, I think to start with, Getty, the term annus horribilis that caught on so much was a description that the Queen gave to that period in our history, the mid-90s, the recession in the United Kingdom, the political situation was not too easy. And of course, there was the fire at Windsor and the difficulties in the royal family. But the Queen really wasn't talking about her annus horribilis. She's simply not self-obsessed in that way. She was talking about the sort of state of the country. And I found her a very steady person in that respect. In the 7 years I worked for her, probably the most difficult time of her 70-year reign, I never once during that year, 1992, sensed the Queen feeling disconsolate or fed up or upset by things. Her approach was very much more the sort of wartime commitment, keep going, and not sort of looking back, but looking forward. And I think that was it was a marvelous thing for me as press secretary to know that the boss that you were working for was always going to be steady. She was always going to be committed and continue with the job. And Prince Philip was the same. They were they were committed to duty, and they enjoyed what they were doing. The Queen was still enjoying doing her boxes and talking about politics to her Prime Minister. And of course, 24 hours before she died, she committed the absolutely essential core duty of a modern constitutional monarch, which was to appoint a new Prime Minister. And I think that's remarkable, sort of monarch of 96, who's able to go on living and working and carrying out duties in that way.
I had a conversation last week with Lord Luce, who had been Lord Chamberlain in the Royal Palace, and he said that when he was hired by the Queen, he was given one instruction, and that was to make the atmosphere happy for the staff, because the Queen believed that if the staff was happy, they would give their best to the monarchy. If you were to describe her as a boss, as a manager, as it were, how would you describe her?
I describe her, first of all, as a very sympathetic and supportive boss. And secondly, with all the seriousness of the business of monarchy, the Queen always had a good sense of humour, so there'd be a sardonic remark, there'd be something amusing that was said. And it wasn't all grim, it was very sort of upbeat. And at the end of a long day on a state visit abroad, she would invite members of the team, senior and junior, to come and sit down and have a drink and talk about the day and how it went. There were laughs as well as sort of good stories to be told, and it was as well as being an very absorbing task to work for the Queen. It's also very enjoyable and amusing at times.
Charles Anson, thank you very much. I like that image of cocktails with the Queen, quick happy hour at the palace. Thank you very much for joining us and for your patience. Let's join now my colleague Jonathan Blake, who's at the back of the queue, or the beginning of the queue, in Southwark Park. Jonathan, I spoke to you yesterday and you were speaking to people just as they had come out from paying their respects to the Queen's coffin here at Westminster with me. Now you're at the very beginning of the queue. What are people making of what they're going to have to do for the next however many hours it is that they're going to be standing in that line?
This is the very start of what will be a very long wait for so many people, and you can probably see the crowd snaking their way through Southwark Park here in southeast London in the sunshine on this Saturday afternoon, and it's been constantly moving over the last few hours. The queue is open, even though that advised wait time is up to now, I think, 16 hours. It's certainly not putting people off at all, and things seem here to be running very smoothly. Everyone's in good spirits and prepared for the long day, and probably some of the night as well ahead of them. And we can speak to a couple of people now who've been waiting patiently to have a word with us. And you joined the queue at about 2 o'clock this afternoon, didn't you? Farah and Kathy. And so tell me why you wanted to come, because you were telling me earlier that you were very young when the Queen came to the throne.
Yes, I was like 4 days old when her father died. That's what my mom said. And she became Queen. So I have known her for 70 years. When she celebrated her Jubilee, I also celebrated 70. And so I've known her all my life, really. And my mom, she actually really only, she would look at all the weddings, and then she would call me. I actually came to London in 1971. I'm from Trinidad. And she would say, "Did you see the wedding? Did you see Diana? Did you see the dress?" And I'm like, "Mom, I've been working." I'll look at it. When you go home, you must look at it. Okay, get someone to tape it for you. So we grew up, we grew up like loving the royals, and then and I came to London. I did my lesson, and I'm still here.
And you work together as colleagues in the NHS.
Yes.
Farah, tell me why you wanted to come and see the Queen's lying in state.
The Queen is the nation's grandma, and we love her. And we have to come and say a final goodbye. We love her.
Well, you're about an hour or so into what will be a very long wait ahead. How are you prepared for the queue? Have you got supplies? You've got layers of clothing?
Snacks. I've got my coat in a bag. I've got gloves. I've got a scarf. I've got a warm dress with leggings and socks. I'm ready.
And you're prepared for the wait?
I'm ready.
Could be a very long wait ahead.
I'm ready. Yeah. We can go till Monday morning. It's fine.
All right, till Monday morning.
We work on Tuesday. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for having a chat with us.
Welcome.
So there you go. They're ready for the wait. It could be many hours before they reach the other end of the queue where you are, Catty, and filing past the coffin eventually in Westminster Hall. Just behind me at the gate here at the northern end of Southern Park is where people are assembling to cross just a couple of streets away to the River Thames and begin that part of the queue. Tower Bridge is the first major London landmark they'll see before the queue continues its way along towards Westminster and the lying in state at Westminster Hall.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you very much. Well, those lovely ladies you've just been speaking to, I've just been doing the calculations. They should reach the end of the queue where I am, which is sort of snaky affair, I reckon around 4 or 5 tomorrow morning, which sounds like a long time to go. So I'm very glad, Ben, back in front of Buckingham Palace, that they have their socks with them, because they will need them.
Yeah, and it was interesting, Catty, when we were watching King Charles and Prince William talking to some of those in the queue, that William was almost apologetic and saying to them, well, at least you'll be on the halfway line, and I'm sorry you've had to wait so long, like it was somehow his fault. But he really had concern for the length of time, and he said to them, the Queen would not have believed the huge outpouring of grief and the sheer number of people joining that queue. And those people don't seem daunted at all, do they, by the length of wait?
No, and actually, obviously everybody has come to pay their respects, but there seems to be a kind of quantifiable difference between grief and crying, and actually the mood in the queue. I've been here yesterday and today just talking to people. It's sort of jolly. People are enjoying the experience of being together in this moment and doing something that is part of history. I'm sure inside Westminster Hall, when they are standing in front of the coffin, then, they have that moment of silence and it's a sombre affair. But talking to them now, I see why William felt he had to apologise. I think I would too, anyone standing in line for that long. But there is a very good atmosphere here, even after they've been queuing all night long and it was chilly.
And it's interesting when you and other reporters talk to people in the queue. I always feel a bit nervous that they're going to lose their place in the queue while you're talking to them. But actually, it's very, very well organised, isn't it? They've all got wristbands, there are toilets, there are facilities. It's organised in a very British way.
When I came over from the States, because I flew over a couple of days ago, Ben, people were already saying to me, my God, we knew the English liked to queue, but they're queuing to get in a queue, which seemed even more British than anything that the Americans could imagine. And you're right, this is not New York City or even Washington, where I come from. It's very well behaved. And people are looking out for each other. So if somebody goes to talk to the press, they are allowed back into the queue by the other people. There's a sort of nice collegial spirit about it.
There is indeed. If there's one thing the British know how to do, and that is how to queue. Catty, thank you very much indeed for the moment. That's it from me and Catty. Now I'll hand you back to the studio and Christian.
Ben Brown there at Buckingham Palace. Ben, thank you very much indeed. I can just tell you, in fact, that Joe Biden, the US President, is en route to the UK, and he will be here in London tomorrow for a gathering at the Palace tomorrow evening on the eve of the funeral, which will be attended by President Biden, President Macron, around 100 world leaders, presidents and heads of state, including 20 royals as well. Should be some event in the picture gallery there in Buckingham Palace tomorrow. Let's have a look at some of the other world news. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says investigations into possible Russian war crimes are continuing in the city of Izium. Bodies are being exhumed from a mass grave on the edge of the city, which was recently retaken from Russian forces. Ukrainian officials say more than 440 people are buried there. Our correspondent Hugo Bechega has been monitoring events from Kyiv.
In Izium's pine forest, as bodies are recovered, the truth is beginning to emerge. This burial site has more than 400 graves now being reopened. The horrors of Russia's war are coming to surface. Investigators say the first body they exhumed was of a civilian who had a rope around his neck. In one grave, they found the bodies of around 20 Ukrainian soldiers. Their work here has just started. But officials already say that almost all these people died because of Russia.
According to our data, almost everyone died because of Russian soldiers. Some were killed, some were tortured, some were hit in Russian air or artillery strikes.
Izium was liberated from Russian control just days ago. This is now the site of a war crimes investigation. Ukraine is determined to discover the identities of the victims and what happened to them.
There's already clear evidence of torture, humiliating treatment of people. There's evidence that Russian soldiers, whose positions were not far from this place, shot at the buried just for fun. The world must react to all this. Russia has repeated in Izium what it did in Bucha.
Ukraine says it's going ahead with its counter-offensive. It's forced Russia to leave dozens of towns and villages in the northeast. It hopes this will be a turning point in the conflict, but it still faces massive challenges. President Putin says his plans haven't changed and that Russia isn't in a hurry.
Our offensive operations in Donbas itself do not stop. They keep going at a slow pace, but the Russian army is progressively, gradually occupying new territories.
Today, Ukraine celebrates Rescuers' Day. In Izium, many will be at work, digging the ground in search of answers.
Well, meanwhile, the US President Joe Biden has warned Russia not to use chemical or tactical nuclear weapons in the war in Ukraine. Speaking during an interview with CBS News, Mr. Biden said such action would change the face of war unlike anything since World War II.
Don't. It will change the face of war unlike anything since World War II.
And the consequences of that would be what? What would the U.S. response be?
Do you think I would tell you if I knew exactly what it would be? Of course I'm not going to tell you. It'll be consequential. They'll become more of a pariah in the world than they ever have been, and depending on the extent of what they do, it will determine what response would occur.
Joe Biden speaking to 60 Minutes. In other news, a group of 8 cheetahs has been released into the wild in India, 70 years after the world's fastest land animal was declared extinct in the country. The cheetahs were released into Kuno National Park hours after arriving in India in a special aircraft from Namibia. It's the first time a large carnivore has been moved from one continent to another. But critics warn they may struggle to adapt to the Indian habitat. The BBC's Nitin Sravista has more.
India has had a long history of cheetahs. From medieval times to the Mughal emperors, they used to be a royal escort in hunting expeditions. But in the 18th and 19th century, they themselves started to be hunted. One of the reasons given for their extinction. Another reason was that they are animals who are really reluctant to breed when under captivity. It was in the early 1950s that the government of India declared that there are not a single cheetah present in the country. But now there is a lot of excitement in the country 70 years after they were declared extinct. 8 cheetahs from Namibia have arrived. 8 more are expected to be here from South Africa. This arrival of 8 cheetahs has been coincided with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's birthday. But there still are some important questions which remain to be answered. These cheetahs, they were bred and they have come from Africa. They are now in a central Indian park where they will eventually be exposed to more than 150 leopards and bears and all animals for their survival. For now, they have been kept in quarantine zones. They are being monitored by drones. They have radio collars in their necks, and there are more than 400 people to watch their movements. But all that only for about 45 days, after which they will be gradually released into the jungle and left alone to fend for themselves. The big question is, will this cheetah, which has come from overseas, will survive in the Indian conditions after 70 years? Nitin Srivastava, BBC News, Delhi.
Well, let's return to our top story. And Queen Elizabeth had a very strong attachment to France, a country she visited many times and whose language she spoke fluently. France reciprocated the feeling. President Macron said the French were grateful for Her Majesty's deep affection for their country. She mastered our language, he said. She loved our culture. She touched our hearts. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
In 1948, aged just 22, Her Majesty fell for Paris and Paris fell for her. On an official visit representing her father, the newly married Princess Elizabeth was the toast of the town, charming her hosts with her grace, beauty and perfect French.
Je suis particulièrement heureuse que ce soit pour venir en France.
That post-war visit left the Queen with happy memories, not least of the flower market near Notre Dame Cathedral, which she loved and which now bears her name.
Her Majesty came back to France many times over her long reign. The last occasion was in 2014, and at the end of that state visit, she expressly asked for a chance to come back again and look around this flower market, which she'd first seen as a young woman 66 years before.
For the florist who had the task of handing the Queen a bouquet on that visit 8 years ago, it was a day not to be forgotten.
I fell in love with her on the spot. You could tell straight away this was a woman of substance. You know, the Queen's not showbiz, she's not Madonna, but a truly great person.
Head of the French state is Charles de Gaulle.
From Charles de Gaulle in 1960 on, she met all the presidents of the Fifth Republic, helping smooth over the rows of the moment and keeping the entente cordiale. With François Mitterrand in 1994, she inaugurated the Channel Tunnel, and she returned regularly for anniversaries of the D-Day landings in Normandy. In 2008, she welcomed Nicolas Sarkozy and his wife Carla Bruni for a state banquet at Windsor Castle. He found it magnificent that after riding together in a gilded coach, the Queen showed her guests personally to their bedroom. Today, he says, the UK must not forget the huge affection felt for Her Majesty on this side of the Channel too.
We were so used to having Queen Elizabeth in our lives that we could not imagine she would one day leave us. It's no small paradox that this woman, who kept herself out of the media, was, in reality, so very present in our lives. And not just in the lives of the British, but in the life of all of Europe.
At the UK Embassy in Paris, people have been coming to sign the book of condolences for Her Majesty. As President Macron put it, for the French, she may not have been their queen, she was, more simply perhaps, the queen. Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
The horse racing community has said it's lost its best friend following the Queen's death. The sport was, of course, one of the Queen's greatest passions. Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes reports.
After working closely with the Queen as her racing and bloodstock advisor for more than 2 decades, there are very few people outside of the royal household who knew Her Majesty as well as John Warren.
She was so clear-thinking. She was a tremendous listener and always got to the punchline. And she was able to see the best in people. And she was very pragmatic.
The Queen spoke to John Warren several times a week and was with him at Balmoral the weekend before she passed away.
It's comforting to know that right at the end of her life, with all her family around, coming and going, and being able to talk horses right to the end, was a very important memory I will have of the Queen.
As the son-in-law to the Queen's former racing manager, Lord Porchester, John Warren is long established in the royal racing family. But since taking over in 2001, he guided Her Majesty to some of her most memorable successes, including the Ascot Gold Cup winning filly Estimate, whom she bred.
The memory that will stay with me forever is the Queen's eyes welling up with tears, and the emotion in her face was something that, even knowing her for nearly 40 years, that I'd never seen that emotion so relevant. And that was such a joyful occasion.
Over her lifetime, the Queen bred and owned more than 1,000 winners. But it's clear she loved the taking part just as much as the winning.
The Queen adored naming her horses, and being as intellectual as she was, she would spend a lot of her spare time working out the name of the sire and the name of the dam and trying to find a clever name for the horse that related to how it was bred.
It's too early to discuss royal racing succession. The Queen Consort Camilla has been mooted as the obvious option. But for now, the sport is still coming to terms with the loss of what many have called racing's best friend. Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes, BBC News.
She certainly loved her horses. Plenty more to come here on BBC News. Do stay with us.
Good afternoon. It has turned into a beautiful day for many of us after what was a decidedly chilly start. The coldest start we've had for quite some time, with a number of spots in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland dropping to freezing or below. Even in the heart of London, temperatures dropped to around 7 degrees overnight. But we have had lots of sunshine so far today. The satellite picture from earlier on does show more cloud across some parts of Scotland, particularly up towards the north. That cloud continuing to slip southwards as we go through the afternoon with the odd shower. Also some showers affecting eastern coasts, particularly around the coast of Norfolk, blown in on quite a brisk breeze. Lighter winds further west. Plenty of sunshine, particularly for Wales, the Midlands, the southwest of England. Temperatures between 14 and 18 degrees. A rather cool and quite autumnal feel to the weather. Now in the London area, it stays mostly sunny through the rest of today. Into Sunday and Monday, we will see more in the way of cloud, perhaps producing just the odd shower, particularly during Sunday. As we go through this evening and tonight, we are going to see more cloud rolling its way in from the northwest. Could bring the odd shower across Scotland, maybe Northern Ireland and Northern England by the end of the night. Further south, where we keep the clearest of the skies, could be the odd mist patch, and it will be another chilly night, maybe down to around 3 degrees in some spots in the countryside. A little milder further north to start tomorrow morning, where we have more in the way of cloud and 1 or 2 showers. It's not completely impossible that we could see the odd shower just getting down into the London area during the afternoon. At the same time, it should start to brighten up a little in the northeast of Scotland with some spells of sunshine. Still quite breezy for this east coast, 15 for Newcastle. Further south and west, highs of around 17 or 18 degrees. As we head into Monday, the day of the Queen's state funeral, high pressure will be building more strongly across the UK. Certainly for England and Wales, that will keep things largely dry, with some spells of sunshine, a bit more cloud developing as the day wears on. For Northern Ireland and for Scotland, a weak frontal system will bring more in the way of cloud. Some spots of rain, still some brightness in northeast Scotland, with temperatures in Aberdeen up to 14 degrees. Highest values in the southwest, 20 in Plymouth.
Hello, welcome to BBC News. I'm Ben Brown, live at Buckingham Palace, where more members of the royal family have been out to speak to mourners. There were cheers as King Charles and the Prince of Wales greeted people waiting in the queue for the Queen's lying in state. And the Earl and Countess of Wessex have been meeting people outside Buckingham Palace.
I'm Katty Kay live at Westminster, where the queue to stand in line to see the Queen is now 16.5 hours long.
Rehearsals for Monday's state funeral procession at Windsor have been taking place. Some of the details were overseen by the late monarch before her death.
And I'm Christian Fraser. In other news, investigations are continuing into possible Russian war crimes in the city of Izium. More than 400 bodies are being exhumed from a burial site. Moscow not to resort to the use of chemical or tactical nuclear weapons. India's Prime Minister releases 8 cheetahs into a national park 70 years after the world's fastest land animal was declared extinct in the country.
Hello from Buckingham Palace, which is bathed in glorious afternoon September sunshine here today. And King Charles and the Prince of Wales have this afternoon been chatting to people who are queuing in London to see the Queen's lying in state at Westminster Hall. They thanked people for waiting many hours through the night to get to Westminster Hall before the state funeral on Monday. And in the last hour or so here at Buckingham Palace, the Earl and Countess of Wessex have also been meeting well-wishers outside the palace. Prince Edward shook hands with many people in the crowd, and Sophie chatted with various members of the public here and was handed quite a few bouquets. Well, the Queen's 8 grandchildren, including Princes William and Harry, will hold their own vigil later on today in Westminster Hall at the Queen's coffin. Paul Adams has this report.
At Lambeth Bridge this morning, a warm welcome for the King and his eldest son, the new Prince of Wales. The two mingled with those waiting to pay respects to the Queen.
30 hours no sleep.
Did you 30 hours?
Yeah.
Because you're very good on 30 hours.
These walkabouts already a hallmark of the new King's reign. It's here that he seems to be most relaxed and happy.
3 cheers for His Majesty!
Not far away, the ritual continues. The third full day on which members of the public from far and wide have come to offer thanks and say goodbye. These people endured a long, cold night for the chance of a few brief moments. It's quiet, respectful. The atmosphere of reverence only punctuated briefly last night as a man tried to rush the coffin and was wrestled to the ground. Earlier, the late Queen's 4 children, all in uniform, mounted their own vigil. Tonight it'll be the turn of her 8 grandchildren, very public displays of private grief.
How humbling is that?
You got to see the whole family. It was incredible, absolutely amazing.
No, it was a very emotional moment, and that just added to the whole afternoon, evening. Unbelievable.
She's the only female we've ever had and will ever have on our planet that is known by everybody in the world, from the smallest island to the largest area on our planet. No, she's just the only one, our Queen. And that to me fills me with, just immense pride.
And with each passing day, more signs of round-the-clock preparations. This was Windsor in the early hours of the morning. Grenadier Guards accompanying the hearse that will carry the Queen's coffin back to the castle for Monday's final ceremonies. At Windsor's Victoria Barracks, representatives of all 3 services getting ready for something they, and most of us, have not seen before.
Plenty of preparation and planning's gone into this, clearly, to make sure the late Majesty Queen Elizabeth has the best that we can give her. And everything went exactly to plan, to be honest. Apart from the weather this morning being a bit nippy, it's all good. Yeah.
Back at Westminster Hall, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was among world leaders paying respects this morning. Politicians, past and present, are all taking their turns. For 70 years, people came to London to see the Queen. They're still doing it today. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Well, we're hearing that China's decided to send the country's vice president to the funeral of Queen Elizabeth on Monday. That decision was made despite what was seen as a snub being delivered to a Chinese delegation that wanted to attend the Queen's lying in state. They were banned from going to that because the Chinese government had sanctioned several British members of Parliament over their comments about Xinjiang and the treatment of the Uyghur population. Meanwhile, human rights groups have also criticised the decision to invite the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to the funeral. Western intelligence agencies have said that in all probability Mohammed bin Salman ordered the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018, something he has denied. We have heard that he is not actually coming to the funeral. And one other line of news about a very important visitor who is coming to the state funeral on Monday. President Joe Biden is now on his way to London, we are hearing. Downing Street, by the way, have said that the Prime Minister is not going to be holding talks with President Biden tomorrow, which we had thought there was going to take place because apparently there's going to be a full bilateral meeting between them, which will take place at the UN General Assembly on Wednesday. Let's talk about some of the day's events here at Buckingham Palace and at Westminster now with our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell. We've had quite a few walkabouts by various members of the royal family today, Sarah, haven't we? We had the King Charles and the Prince of Wales, who went to meet some of the people in the queue, that very long queue. We had the Countess and the Earl of Wessex here at Buckingham Palace. Really a chance today, I suppose, ahead of the state funeral for members of the royal family to meet the public who are grieving as they are grieving.
Yeah, a really busy day actually today, both behind Buckingham Palace's walls and out front. So for the King, his day started this morning meeting Chiefs of Staff inside Buckingham Palace. Then he travelled to Lambeth to meet some of the Met Police. Obviously this is a huge logistical operation that's going on at the moment and has been for the last 8 or 9 days and will do until the funeral. So he learned about some of those logistics, acknowledged, took thanks, said thank you, for the work that people are doing, and then, as you say, went outside, and his son, the Prince of Wales, was outside as well, and both of them went on a walkabout, and it was quite a lengthy walkabout. I think the statistics are that the King was out for about 18 minutes and the Prince of Wales for over half an hour. And they were obviously speaking to people in the queue, people who had queued for many, many, many hours and still, frankly, had many, many hours left to queue, but just took a moment to say thank you and to acknowledge the huge efforts that people are making to come and pay tribute to their mother and their grandmother.
This has been a hallmark of the first few days of King Charles's reign, hasn't he? Going out of his way to spend a lot of time meeting members of the public, shaking hands, having conversations.
Yeah, and you were here, weren't you, that first day when he arrived back from Scotland and stopped outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. And I don't really think anybody was expecting that to happen, but it was a really, special moment, certainly for the people that were here. And he has spoken about the solace, the comfort that he has got from hearing the good wishes from people and hearing how much his mother meant to them. So those walkabouts are a way to give back and to acknowledge that strength of feeling. And then this afternoon, just in the last hour, the Queen's youngest son, Prince Edward, and his wife, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, they came out of the gates of Buckingham Palace. These people have been here not in any expectation that they were going to meet a royal today, but in various key places across the country and in here, obviously, Buckingham Palace, people have been congregating. A building obviously so linked to the Queen, and as you see there, Prince Edward chatting to the crowds, the Countess of Wessex chatting to the crowds as well, and they spent over half an hour listening to people, shaking hands with people, saying thank you to people, finding out why they'd come, where they'd come from, what they were doing, and I suppose what the Queen meant to them, and why they felt that they wanted to be here.
And in Westminster Hall, at the Queen's coffin, last night we saw the late Queen's children standing vigil by the coffin. Tonight it's the turn of the grandchildren, 8 grandchildren.
Absolutely. So we saw Prince Edward standing by the coffin last night, and as you say, this evening we will see all 8 of her grandchildren there. Princes William and Harry, they will stand at the foot and the head and the foot of the coffin, and they'll be surrounded by the Duke of York's 2 daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, by Zara Tyndall and Peter Phillips, Princess Anne's children, and by Lady Louise and Viscount Severn, the Earl and Countess of Wessex's children, who are still relatively young, but the palace, have made clear that it was the children were consulted on this, and they really wanted to do this. So they are going to, as their parents did, spend 15 minutes mounting a vigil around the coffin, and those pictures from last night were incredibly powerful. It was absolutely silent while the Queen's children stood there, and I'm sure it's going to be the same when the grandchildren stand there. And an issue that has been talked about, because it was understood that Prince Harry wasn't going to be wearing military uniform during any of these ceremonial events. The palace has made clear that it was the King's wish that actually he will be wearing uniform, so both Harry and William will be wearing military uniform as they mount their vigil this evening.
All right, Sarah Campbell, thank you very much indeed, our royal correspondent, who's with me here at Buckingham Palace. Let's get a sense now of how the queuing is going for members of the public who want to pay their respects and pay their tributes to the late Queen in Westminster Hall. And we can cross to Catty Kay, who's in Westminster. Catty Kay, the queue at one stage reached, I think, 25 hours. It's down quite considerably, I think down to about 16 hours now, so slightly more manageable, but still an incredibly long wait for people, and yet they don't seem daunted at all.
No, 16 hours is still very long, isn't it, Ben? Especially when you have to go through the night and it's cold. And it was interesting hearing what people are wrapping up in. They're bringing their coats, they're bringing socks, they're bringing anything they can to get them through the night. But I have to say, the mood is very festive here. You've got kids I'm watching with their parents, you've got elderly people. Certainly no one seems to be deterred by the fact that it is taking so long. I'm joined now by somebody who's been involved in some of the planning around the funeral, who can talk to us a little bit about that and his own relationship with the Queen, and that is Lieutenant General Sir Andrew Gregory. Thank you very much for joining us, Sir Andrew. first of all, you have known the Queen for a long time because you're involved in a charity that she has been associated with since she was a child.
I am. SAFA, the Armed Forces Charity. So I'll just give you a tiny history about it. It was established in 1885 to look after families when soldiers went overseas, and out of it came the Soldiers and Sailors Families Association. And 137 years later, the Soldiers, Sailors, Airmen and Families Association, SAFA, the Armed Forces Charity, looks after about 80,000 people each year. And Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth was our patron since 1952, but her work started long before that. When she was a teenager with Princess Margaret, they delivered honey from their hives to SAFA children's homes, and much more, including donating gifts from her wedding to Prince Philip. So a long, long association.
And you have met her several times.
I've had the great honour of meeting Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. I've had audiences with her in Buckingham Palace.
Were you nervous beforehand?
Unbelievably nervous.
I'm glad you admit it.
Oh, unbelievably. I mean, it's such a privilege, and you think of the messages you want to get across to this quite extraordinary individual. And I was there to talk both about the charity and another role I have as the head of the Royal Artillery, the Master Gunner St James's Park, where Her Majesty was our Captain General. And she has knowledge about these organisations and the ability to provide perceptive insights that are wonderful and remarkable.
I think we've got a photograph, I hope we can show that, of a time when you were with Her Majesty driving around, is it Hyde Park?
It was Hyde Park.
And it was in about 2017, and you are...
So it was a very special day. It was the 24th of October 2017, and Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth came to inspect the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery. And the date is important because 70 years previously, exactly 70 years, her father, King George VI, had inspected what were then called the Riding Troop. And at the end of his visit, when asked to sign the visitor's book, he crossed out the word riding and wrote Kings. And that is why they are called the King's Troop. And they have obviously been heavily involved, firing salutes, and had the honour of providing the gun carriage that moved Her Majesty.
It looks like she was thoroughly enjoying herself.
She was fantastic, and on the way back to the saluting dais, we were driving across a slightly bumpy Hyde Park, and she said, "What causes all this, and is it people playing football?" And I said, "Mum, I blame the Household Cavalry Regiment," because she likes a bit of banter between her military units.
She liked a little bit of that competition. You will also be attending the funeral on Monday. Can you tell us about the capacity that you'll be there in?
So I will be there as the Master Gunner St James's Park, the head of the Royal Artillery, and I had the privilege of being in Westminster Abbey and then marching in the procession along with other regiments and corps who had a close affiliation with Her Majesty. And also in the Abbey we will have our national chairman to represent SAFA, the Armed Forces Charity. A huge honour, a very sad day, and a day we all want to do our very best for Her Majesty and indeed for the King.
But I can imagine, having met her several times as you had and appreciating her, you wouldn't want to be anywhere else on Monday.
I wouldn't, and I have a challenging personal clash, but I would not be anywhere else. It is very important. She, for 70 years, served this nation selflessly, putting everything before herself. That is what I must do too.
Okay, Sir Andrew Gregory, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Well, officials have warned they could be forced to close the queue again to see the Queen lying in state if it reaches capacity later on today. Thousands have been waiting, as we said, patiently for hours to pay their respects. Waiting time, 16.5 hours, so you're in for quite a long wait if you do join that queue. Our correspondent Charlotte Gallagher has been in Westminster. She's at the very front of the queue.
Throughout the early hours, on one of the coldest nights since spring, a queue of thousands snaked its way through central London and beyond. Spirits are high, but temperatures have been plummeting, and some, well, are more prepared than others.
Cold, tiring, but yeah, worth it.
Hands up so they can be checked by security at the gate, please.
An army of volunteers are helping at every stage.
When we join Scouts, we have to say our promise, and part of that promise is to do our duty to the Queen, and this is our way of achieving that one last time. So it is an honour to be here, really.
And for the cold, tired and hungry, that help is appreciated.
I saw blankets and I was so cold, my body ached with shivering, so I was so grateful for it.
Some don't just come here for themselves, but for those who are no longer here. Lorraine's relatives served in the military.
It'd be nice to kind of come here and say to, you know, thank you for all your services and that, and to kind of recognise what she's done, and also for my male members in the family as well. So yeah, it's going to be a really special moment, and you know, something to remember as well. And I've actually got my brother's ashes with me today as well.
To finally see the Queen's coffin is overwhelming for many, saying thank you to a woman who is with us for so long.
Just built up, just waited for the moment to be in there, and yeah, it's just drawn, just had to go, felt just had to really. She was just beautiful and just awesome, lovely.
What an incredible out-of-body experience the whole thing is. I don't know, it's really hard to describe.
After queuing all night and paying respects to the Queen, it's time to say goodbye to new friends. But for those just joining the line, it's going to be a long, long wait. Charlotte Gallagher, BBC News, Westminster.
And that long wait doesn't seem to be deterring anybody. I've been watching the queue for the last few hours. There is everybody, old, young, families. There are also, I've noticed, a lot of women in the queue. It seems that for them, paying tribute to the Queen in particular has been something they really wanted to do, Ben.
And Cassie, you've just come here from the United States where you live and work. Let me ask you, what has been the view of the Queen's death and indeed her extraordinary reign in the United States? Obviously, she's been our Queen, but I think President Macron the other day was saying for people in other countries, she's simply the Queen, a sort of global iconic figure.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, really, she is so much associated with Britain's history, but the Americans are very proud of saying she's met 13 of the last 14 presidents. There's been pretty much non-stop coverage of everything that's been happening here in the UK, of her life on American television, which is really surprising. There's a lot going on in the States too. There's inflation, there's elections coming up in just a few weeks' time, and yet they've handed over their schedules to the death of the Queen and the funeral that's being prepared. I was speaking to one American television executive just today who said they had 200 people coming into London to cover the funeral, and that's because American audiences are fascinated. Of course, they broke with Britain, they broke with the monarchy over 200 years ago, but they have really been enthralled by the life of the Queen, and so many people have just come up to me in the streets and said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "Well, I didn't know the Queen personally." He says, "Yes, but we feel a loss," and it is that sense of Britain from a different era, the sense of history, the sense of something that America doesn't really have, a royal family and all of the royal traditions and the pageantry. That's what people are so interested in. I think the real question that's interesting, Ben, is after the Queen's funeral, and when it is now no longer Queen Elizabeth, but it's King Charles III, does America have quite the same fascination with the royal family as it has done for the last 70 years?
All right, Catty, thank you very much indeed. And Joe Biden, US President, we gather, is now on his way here to London for Monday's state funeral. Well, people heading to London have been told to prepare for unprecedented demand for public transport as tens of thousands continue to arrive here in the capital to pay their respects to the late Queen Elizabeth. Our correspondent Jane McCubbin has been meeting people making the trip to the capital.
This is an exodus.
OK, so have we all been to the toilet?
Gentlemen, last call for the 12:30 to London.
Hundreds of thousands of people are on the move. All heading to the capital. All with one purpose. In Sandbach service station on the M6, we go in search of those on a pilgrimage, and we find Leslie.
There's only 2,000 people going to the funeral, and you will be one of the 2,000.
I can't believe it. I've been invited. It's still in a bit of shock. So I was on my way back from IKEA on Sunday, and all of a sudden I get this call from the Cabinet Office in the car saying that in recognition of my recent award of MBE, because I haven't been invested yet, to go to an investiture, would I like to attend the funeral on the 19th? And I just can't believe it, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm absolutely blown away.
Hello.
In Rugby, the Richmond family have taken the kids out to school early to drive to London to lay flowers for the Queen.
You're ready to go, aren't you? This is our rainbow that we made, wasn't it, for the Queen? Yeah. So you've got to hold on to that. Willow was quite affected by it. She is very taken with the Queen and her handbags and her dresses, and
you wanted the kids to
we wanted
be
them
a
to
part
be a
of
part
this
of
moment.
Yeah. So we made a rainbow, didn't you, of all her favourite things. So what have we got?
A crown.
And crown and the teacups and her lovely Philip.
I'm happy and sad, and I'm excited to go and see the Queen.
I try not to cry. She was just the great nan of the nation, really. Earlier, I think.
Team Richmond, go, go, go!
Do a big wave. It's a long way to London.
While the Richmonds set off by car, ticket sales to London are up across the country. National Express say their London sales are up by 40% this week.
Have you brought any food?
I've got a bottle of water.
That's it?
Yeah.
Barbara from Salford is travelling alone, and she's travelling light.
How long are you planning on going for, Barbara?
As long as it takes.
But show us your bag.
This is all she's packed.
This is instead of a hotel room in London.
It is. And it's got, I think I need to go and see her. I need to walk past. I've been crying for days. Never been to London before, so it's a new adventure. If it didn't make this journey, then I'd be always wondering in the back of my mind, I should have gone, I should have done it.
We have to today, anyway, nice.
To see the Queen?
Oh, lovely.
I need to do it, for me.
Last call for the 12:30, please.
Bye. Stay safe.
There will be grief, but for Barbara, the shared experience of heading to the capital promises more friendship and unity.
Well, a lot of those people coming to the capital, of course, joining the queue to see the Queen's coffin, but others going to Windsor and some coming here to Buckingham Palace. We've had huge crowds here at Buckingham Palace today. They're still here, as you can see, in lovely afternoon sunshine. It's been a glorious day here at the palace, and the crowds who were here, they've been greeted by members of the royal family. King Charles they saw earlier on, coming out in his vehicle, going to meet the queues along the River Thames, people who are waiting to get into Westminster Hall, and Prince William, they saw him in his car as well leaving. And then there was that walkabout with the Earl and Countess of Wessex, who came out through the gates earlier on to meet the crowds. This is the scene in the queue there now for Westminster Hall, about 16 and a half hours at the moment. That's the latest from Buckingham Palace. I'm going to hand you back now to the studio.
Ben Brown at Buckingham Palace, thank you very much indeed for that. We're going to take a look at some of the day's other news, starting with Ukraine. And the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the investigations into possible Russian war crimes are continuing in the city of Izium. Bodies are being exhumed from a mass grave on the edge of the city, which was recently retaken from Russian forces. Ukrainian officials say more than 440 people are buried there. Our correspondent Hugo Bechega has been monitoring events from Kyiv.
In Izium's pine forest, as bodies are recovered, the truth is beginning to emerge. This burial site has more than 400 graves now being reopened. The horrors of Russia's war are coming to surface. Investigators say the first body they exhumed was of a civilian who had a rope around his neck. In one grave, they found the bodies of around 20 Ukrainian soldiers. Their work here has just started, but officials already say that almost all these people died because of Russia.
According to our data, almost everyone died because of Russian soldiers. Some were killed, some were tortured, some were hit in Russian air or artillery strikes.
Izum was liberated from Russian control just days ago. This is now the site of a war crimes investigation. Ukraine is determined to discover the identities of the victims and what happened to them.
There's already clear evidence of torture, humiliating treatment of people. There's evidence that Russian soldiers, whose positions were not far from this place, shot at the buried just for fun. The world must react to all this. Russia has repeated in Izum what it did in Bucha.
Ukraine says it's going ahead with its counter-offensive. It's forced Russia to leave dozens of towns and villages in the northeast. It hopes this will be a turning point in the conflict, but it still faces massive challenges. President Putin says his plans haven't changed and that Russia isn't in a hurry.
Our offensive operations in Donbas itself do not stop. They keep going at a slow pace, but the Russian army is gradually occupying new territories.
Today, Ukraine celebrates Rescuers' Day. In Izum, many will be at work, digging the ground in search of answers.
Well, President Joe Biden has warned Russia not to use chemical or tactical nuclear weapons in the war in Ukraine. Speaking during an interview with CBS News, Mr. Biden said such action would change the face of war unlike anything since World War II.
Don't. It will change the face of war unlike anything since World War II.
And the consequences of that would be what? What would the U.S. response be?
Do you think I would tell you if I knew exactly what it would be? Of course I'm not going to tell you. It'll be consequential. They'll become more of a pariah in the world than they ever have been, and depending on the extent of what they do will determine what response would occur.
Joe Biden speaking to CBS News. Winds of up to 270 kilometres an hour could hit part of Japan in the coming hours, and 0.5 metre of rain is forecast to fall in some areas in just 24 hours. The Japanese government has urged hundreds of thousands of people to leave their homes. Typhoon Nanmadol is expected to hit the southern island of Kyushu on Sunday. The typhoon has the potential to be the most destructive storm to hit Japan in decades. A group of 8 cheetahs has been released into the wild in India, 70 years after the world's fastest land animal was declared extinct in the country. The cheetahs were released into Kuno National Park hours after arriving in India in a special aircraft from Namibia. It's the first time a large carnivore has been moved from one continent to another. But critics warn they may struggle to adapt to the Indian habitat. The BBC's Nitin Srivastava has more.
India has had a long history of cheetahs. From medieval times to the Mughal emperors, they used to be a royal escort in hunting expeditions. But in the 18th and 19th century, they themselves started to be hunted. One of the reasons given for their extinction. Another reason was that they are animals who are really reluctant to breed when under captivity. It was in the early 1950s that the government of India declared that there are not a single cheetah present in the country. But now there is a lot of excitement in the country 70 years after they were declared extinct. 8 cheetahs from Namibia have arrived. 8 more are expected to be here from South Africa. This arrival of 8 cheetahs has been coincided with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's birthday. But there still are some important questions which remain to be answered. These cheetahs, they were bred and they have come from Africa. They are now in a central Indian park where they will eventually be exposed to more than 150 leopards and bears and all animals for their survival. For now, they have been kept in quarantine zones. They are being monitored by drones. They have radio collars in their necks, and there are more than 400 people to watch their movements. But all that only for about 45 days, after which they will be gradually released into the jungle and left alone to fend for themselves. The big question is, will this cheetah, which has come from overseas, will survive in the Indian conditions after 70 years? Nitin Srivastava, BBC News, Delhi.
Well, let's go back to our top story, the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, which of course will be held on Monday after her death at the age of 96. Our home editor Mark Easton looks back at the huge changes in society that the Queen lived through as the longest reigning monarch in British history.
Into the grey of post-war austerity, a beautiful young woman was presented as a new beginning for an impoverished kingdom and its crumbling empire.
Quivers down the backbone.
Queen Elizabeth II took her throne amid social upheaval. With increasing tensions at home and declining influence abroad, a huge responsibility was placed upon the shoulders of the young Queen. The ambition was for a new Elizabethan age. Some feared she was doomed to fail, but Elizabeth was nothing if not determined. In the 60s, the Queen became a bridgehead between continuity and change. In science and in culture, Elizabeth walked a line between tradition and modernity.
Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she doesn't have a lot to say.
Quietly and uncontroversially, Elizabeth worked to ensure the monarchy was not left behind by the change sweeping across her kingdom.
She seemed pleasant enough to us, made us relaxed.
They want to make her mine.
Amid the social conflict of the 70s, the Queen ruled a less deferential kingdom. A time when authority and the established order was being challenged. But predictions of a wave of republicanism proved unfounded. And marking 25 years on the throne, the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977 was a moment when the nation came together to celebrate the monarchy.
When I was 21, I pledged my life to the service of our people. Although that vow was made in my salad days when I was green in judgment, I do not regret nor retract one word of it.
Stars in your eyes, little one, where do you go?
The 1980s saw the Queen encourage the next generation of royals to take centre stage.
The land of make-believe.
The decade saw the nation at war, not least with itself. But the exhibition of family values threatened to become a pantomime as the strains of royal relationships emerged. A soap opera with the Queen as long-suffering matriarch.
Everybody hurts.
4 decades after ascending her throne, the pressures on Elizabeth became incendiary.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure.
Intimate holiday pictures of the Duchess of York in today.
Any hope of presenting the royals as a model family was sustained almost entirely by a monarch who kept private feelings separate from public duties. But her strategy of impassive figurehead was to be sorely tested.
A short while ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales.
Diana's death prompted an extraordinary emotional outpouring.
Goodbye, England's rose.
With demands that the Queen share her personal grief with the world. Elizabeth, though, maintained her distance.
Where lives were torn apart.
True to her conviction of what a monarch should be, but it was a significant gamble in a society that increasingly equated authenticity with wearing your heart on your sleeve. A critical test of relevance for the monarchy and for Elizabeth was her Golden Jubilee in 2002. Some predicted she would be exposed as an aging queen unable to adapt, out of date and out of touch in a new millennium.
The Jubilee girl is here, Pasha!
Contrary to many commentators' expectations, vast numbers joined in the festivities. To survive tumultuous change, the magic ingredient appeared to be consistency. By the 2010s, 4/5 of Elizabeth's subjects had never known another monarch. At the opening of the Olympic Games in London, organisers placed the Queen centre stage in telling the story of Britain. A global audience saw a monarch with the self-confidence to be part of an elaborate joke.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Without ever losing her dignity.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
She had become a national treasure, a jewel in her own crown.
My government will hold a referendum on membership of the European Union.
But 4 years on, and Elizabeth found herself on the throne of a disunited kingdom. The Queen sought to emphasise her neutrality, the palace horrified at claims she had views. Amid Brexit rancour, her message was of love.
The cumulative impact of thousands of small acts of goodness can be bigger than we imagine.
The final decade of the Queen's long life was tinged with regret and loss. Philip, her liege man, her strength and stay, was no longer at her side. A pandemic of dishonour and disappointment arrived at the door of the House of Windsor. Elizabeth's health began to suffer. But as she physically withdrew from public life, her importance as a national figurehead became more pronounced. Across 8 decades, the Elizabethan age was the frame in which the nation's affairs were set, and Elizabeth the golden thread through the history of her kingdom. A great queen, with values for all time.
Mark Easton reporting. Well, after Monday's state funeral for the monarch, there will be a private family service, and Queen Elizabeth II will be interred in Windsor alongside the Duke of Edinburgh. It's a place, of course, that played a huge role throughout her life and reign, as Helena Wilkinson reports.
Military Knights of Windsor were among the thousands who heard the message from Castle Hill.
This was the day the people of Windsor were formally told they had a new monarch.
To bless the Royal Princess Elizabeth II.
But the Queen's special relationship with this town began before she came to the throne.
In wishing you all good evening, I feel that I am speaking to friends and companions.
When she was 14, she made her first address from Windsor Castle to children during the Second World War.
These pictures at a national service at Windsor.
She was involved in other formal duties from a young age. But it was Windsor Great Park where she found freedom and where her love for the countryside grew. It was where she learnt to ride.
Her Majesty's left an amazing legacy across the park.
Paul Sedgwick is the Deputy Ranger of Windsor Great Park and knew the Queen well.
I think at that time there was great freedom to ride around on her horse or her pony, exploring the great expanses of the park, the ancient trees, the parkland.
In 1952, the Queen made her husband, Prince Philip, park ranger. Together, they helped protect and preserve the park.
The avenues of trees, the reintroduction of the red deer, expansion of the gardens, the formal gardens, that continues nearly 1,000 years of royal patronage at Windsor.
We know that the Queen loved Windsor Great Park. Tell us then what it was about these gardens that she loved so much.
We're in the Golden Jubilee Garden at the Savile Garden, which Her Majesty opened in July 2002. It's one of three main gardens at Windsor: the Valley Gardens, the Savile Garden and Frogmore Garden. Coming out of the gardens at Windsor was that during COVID, when Her Majesty was in residence at the castle, every Friday morning we would send a fresh bouquet of flowers from one of the 3 gardens to Windsor Castle for the Queen.
The Queen's legacy is all around the park, and in the town of Windsor too, her presence is felt. From the Windsor Lady's statue of Queen Elizabeth with her corgis to one of 2 Windsor Greys who draw carriages on state occasions, from the Queen's Walkway self-guided tour taking in the Windsor Guildhall and its magnificent portraits, to the books of condolence in the town's churches. At the King George VI Centre, opened by the Queen in 1958, they remember her last visit 5 years ago.
Royalty is, you know, is special to everybody throughout the world. And it's been a real honour to have lived here.
Yeah, so it was the Queen who made us come to Windsor. And we've been happy here, so all these years, you know, so thank you, Queen.
Here they feel a sense of pride. Their pride is shared in and around this town. Sayonara Laxton is the former mayor of Windsor.
What did Windsor mean to the Queen, and how special was that connection with her?
The Queen was the pillar of Windsor. For the people of Windsor, there is nothing else but the Queen. She was the pillar of Windsor. She brought the community together. She brought us all together. We had a meaning. It was so special to have her, to be here in the borough with her. And where else more you would want to be in the world other than in this area?
Windsor will be the Queen's final resting place. On Monday, the world will watch as the State hearse makes its way along the long walk up to the castle. One final journey. For people who live in this town, it will be a deeply personal moment, saying goodbye to the Queen, who was their neighbour and part of their community. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News, Windsor.
Yes, there will be tens of thousands on the long walk come Monday when the State hearse returns. I think I can show you some pictures from Washington of Joe Biden and the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, now leaving the White House en route to the UK. They'll be arriving sometime tomorrow morning, and they will be hosted by King Charles III at Buckingham Palace with so many other heads of state, 100 presidents and heads of government due into London tomorrow, and there will be a gathering, a reception inside Buckingham Palace in the picture gallery. Downing Street confirming today, though, that there will not be any bilateral meeting with the new Prime Minister Liz Truss. That will happen next week at the United Nations. There is a General Assembly in New York next week, which all these leaders will be flying out to on Monday evening. But there you see the US President on his way to the United Kingdom. Well, those crowds still in and around London, around Buckingham Palace, and plenty of them, of course, in the queue, waiting to see the Queen's coffin, which is still lying in state. So let's join Caddy Kay, who is with the members of the public. Hello, Caddy.
Hello, Christian. I think the queue has its own hashtag by now, doesn't it? It's certainly got its own kind of YouTube channel or something. It's got its own wristbands. It's got plenty of people monitoring it. Where I am now, I feel a bit of a fraud because I have not been waiting 11 or 12 hours. These people all have, but they've only got about another 45 minutes to go, so they're very lucky. Okay, let's talk about queues. I want to get into the sort of science of queues. We're going to speak to Professor Andrew Still, who has made studying queues and crowd control his lifelong work. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Still. You were involved in the planning for this queue. Tell us what that actually meant.
Well, this was over a decade ago, and it's Keith Still, not Andrew. We worked on with the Royal Park, City of Westminster, Metropolitan Police on designing a variety of royal events. So worked specifically on the 2011 royal wedding and the plans there. And I'm proud to say that many of my master's students are now actively engaged in the current planning and exercises. So queue management involves a lot more than just the mathematics of throughput. You need to understand the psychology, behavior, welfare, particularly with such a long wait in line. So it's really nice to see how well it's all going at the moment.
What's the psychology of queuing? I thought Brits had queuing down to a T.
Well, nobody loves a long queue. So it's basically understanding how information influences crowd behavior. So when you don't have information, the crowd can become less predictable. When you start to tell them where the end of the queue is, how long they've got to wait, you're managing their expectations. So it really is both a combination of the maths and the psychology of the human behavior and human factors Both of those things need to be incorporated in any large queue management system. And those are the principles and applications I've been teaching now for 30 years.
So I think we've got a map of this queue. Let's see if we can put that up on the screen. And I want you to tell us which were the points along the map that you might have been worried about when you were planning this queue for the Queen's funeral.
I can't see the map, but the whole system is equally something that you would need to look out for. So there are a significant number of volunteers, of people that are responsible for health, safety and welfare. It's typically the last section where fatigue might become a major problem if people have been on their feet for many hours. That you need to monitor the welfare, need to monitor if anybody needs any medical interventions. So typically it's that area close around the site where both security and monitoring the crowd's welfare will be a higher priority.
And at one point yesterday, the queue was stopped for a bit. You couldn't join it anymore, so I guess people were queuing to join the queue. Was that something you had anticipated happening?
It's always a factor to consider. If too many people turn up, then your queuing system. So that's why the information system is so effective, telling people what's happening, where the end of the queue is, and how long that they might have to wait in line.
Were you worried, though, when you heard that they'd had to halt it for a little bit?
I think it's always a concern when, more people turn up. But, I know that the professionalism of all of the teams that are involved there will have been monitoring the crowd in those areas, be aware of the potential for pauses and, assisting people as and when they need help.
So over all those years when this event was being planned, did you anticipate that this many people would stand in a queue for this many hours over several days to come and pay their respects to the Queen?
Yes, nearly all of the royal events have people camping out days in advance. So it's always a factor when you're planning queues. What's the capacity? What happens if 2 times as many people turn up, 5 times as many people, 10 times as many? So the contingency plans here are always factored into what happens if a very large crowd turns up, larger than we anticipate. It's part of the principles of good queue management is what happens if more people turn up, or if we've got inclement weather, or if there are any medical emergencies. How do we deal with it? All of this is incorporated into the overall planning.
Keith, are you going to do the queue yourself?
Unfortunately, I'm on the other side of the country. I'm up in the Lake District, and I've got arthritic hips. I couldn't stand for that length of time.
I'm sorry.
But if we'd been in London, I would have made the effort.
You would have been happy to come and join the crowds here?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so Professor Keith Still, thank you very much for joining us. Well, the mood here is good, and people do know what's happening. They have been told. A couple of people have asked me if I know how long it is, and I confess I have told them I don't know because I don't want to give them the wrong information. But the mood's still remarkably cheerful after standing in the night, in the cold, in the queue, waiting to see the Queen, Christian.
Yeah, Catty, thank you very much indeed. That's Catty Kay for us. Let's go to the back of the queue now. Let's go to Southwark Park where it all begins, and Jonathan Blake is there for us now. And Jonathan, people still joining the queue. I think even though the wait is, quite a long time, I think it's 16 hours at the moment, something like that. People still joining at the rate of, a couple of thousand an hour?
Down to 13 hours, I think, now, Ben. But no, as you say, it's certainly not putting people off all afternoon, all day. In fact, there has been a steady stream of people coming into Southwark Park here in southeast London to begin what will be, for all of them, a very long wait. As you can see behind me, the queue's moving pretty quickly, and there's been some changes to the layout, it seems, in the last day or so that has helped to keep things moving, and people are actually getting quite a good workout with a brisk walk through the park at the very beginning of the queue, and they're then being held just over there at the northern end of Southern Park before crossing a couple of streets and going down to the River Thames to begin their journey 5 miles or so down to Westminster and the lying in state where the Queen's coffin is in Westminster Hall. Everyone seems to be in good spirits and seemingly well prepared for the journey ahead. The sun's going down a bit now, so it's just a little bit chilly here in the shade under the trees, but it's going to get a bit cooler overnight as well. So people are coming armed with lots of layers of clothing and food and drink and provisions that they'll need to keep them going as well. We've heard the stewards clapping and cheering people on as they start the queue. So the mood really here is lively, it's friendly, it's one of almost a celebration really, but as we'll see later on as people continue the journey and make their way towards Westminster, it'll take on a much more sombre mood for many of these people, I'm sure. And it will now be well into the night and into the early hours of the morning before those joining the start of the queue here in Southwark Park reach Westminster Hall and get their moment filing past the Queen's coffin.
All right, Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, they really are moving quite fast behind you right now, and I'm sure they'll be relieved to hear that it's down to 13 hours, as you were saying. At one stage, that queue was actually 25 hours, would you believe? But it doesn't seem to have daunted anybody. They're perfectly prepared to wait as long as it takes to pay their respects to the late Queen Elizabeth. And let's talk now to our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell, who's with me now outside Buckingham Palace. And actually, to cheer up the people who've been queuing for so long, they had a visit today from the King and from the Prince of Wales, who were chatting for a long time to many of those people in the queue. I think it was on the Albert Embankment, actually, where that royal walkabout happened, and they meted the people and thanked them for coming.
Absolutely. This is around 12:30 today, so those people had been queuing for hours by that point, and they still had hours to go. But yeah, the King had been at a meeting at a police station. He'd been talking about to emergency workers, thanking them for their efforts in this huge logistical operation. And then afterwards, he was met outside by his son, the Prince of Wales, and they both went on walkabout. And yeah, 18 minutes for the King, over half an hour for the Prince of Wales, just acknowledging the crowd and thanking them, asking questions how long they'd been waiting for, and the crowd obviously very appreciative of the efforts that they were making to acknowledge the, well, huge sacrifices really that people are making to spend so many hours in the queue. So I think a really, really nice moment. And then here, where we were at Buckingham Palace, lots of people outside here as well today, and they saw the Earl and Countess of Wessex. They came and gave again another very lengthy walkabout, roughly sort of half an hour. So today, very much a time, I think, for the royal family as much as they can before events take, I think, a more sombre tone, certainly on Monday, to come and meet the crowds and say thank you.
Just very briefly, it's been a beautiful day in terms of the weather, hasn't it? I mean, glorious sunshine, an ideal day for the royal family to go out and meet the people.
Absolutely stunning. The weather couldn't have been more perfect. And just to give you an idea of what else has been happening, the King carrying out business, meeting with prime ministers, and that will happen again tomorrow when this massive meeting of world leaders happens.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Sarah Campbell there, our royal correspondent. Much more coverage on BBC News, but from me and Sarah here at Buckingham Palace, good evening.
Good afternoon. It has turned into a beautiful day for many of us after what was a decidedly chilly start. The coldest start we've had for quite some time, with a number of spots in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland dropping to freezing or below. Even in the heart of London, temperatures dropped to around 7 degrees overnight. But we have had lots of sunshine so far today. The satellite picture from earlier on does show more cloud across some parts of Scotland, particularly up towards the north. That cloud continuing to slip southwards as we go through the afternoon with the odd shower. Also some showers affecting eastern coasts, particularly around the coast of Norfolk, blown in on quite a brisk breeze. Lighter winds further west. Plenty of sunshine, particularly for Wales, the Midlands, the southwest of England. Temperatures between 14 and 18 degrees. A rather cool and quite autumnal feel to the weather. Now in the London area, it stays mostly sunny through the rest of today. Into Sunday and Monday, we will see more in the way of cloud, perhaps producing just the odd shower, particularly during Sunday. As we go through this evening and tonight, we are going to see more cloud rolling its way in from the northwest. Could bring the odd shower across Scotland, maybe Northern Ireland and Northern England by the end of the night. Further south, where we keep the clearest of the skies, could be the odd mist patch, and it will be another chilly night, maybe down to around 3 degrees in some spots in the countryside. A little milder further north to start tomorrow morning, where we have more in the way of cloud and 1 or 2 showers. It's not completely impossible that we could see the odd shower just getting down into the London area during the afternoon. At the same time, it should start to brighten up a little in the northeast of Scotland with some spells of sunshine. Still quite breezy for this east coast, 15 for Newcastle. Further south and west, highs of around 17 or 18 degrees. As we head into Monday, the day of the Queen's state funeral, high pressure will be building more strongly across the UK. Certainly for England and Wales, that will keep things largely dry, with some spells of sunshine, a bit more cloud developing as the day wears on. For Northern Ireland and for Scotland, a weak frontal system will bring more in the way of cloud. Some spots of rain, still some brightness in northeast Scotland, with temperatures in Aberdeen up to 14 degrees. Highest values in the southwest, 20 in Plymouth.
You're watching BBC News with me, Christian Fraser, as we continue to cover the events following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Let me show you some live pictures. These are the mourners who are continuing to queue. The queue now down to around 12 hours, we're told, but these people have been waiting through the day to pay their respects to the late monarch, who of course is still lying in state in Westminster Hall. But it's been a very busy day for the royal family. A little earlier, King Charles and Prince William greeted some of those who were queuing. Hundreds of people lining up along the barriers on the banks of the Thames. This is the Albert Embankment close to Lambeth Bridge, cheering and applauding as the King and his son appeared to talk to them. So let's go then live to my colleague Caddy Kay, who is out and about, getting a little cooler, I think, and it was very cold last night for those who persevered, Catty.
It was cold, Christian, yeah, and some people said they brought their socks along with them for tonight's queuing. I'm very glad they did, because it's certainly, as soon as the sun goes down, the temperature starts to drop, and they will definitely need everything warm that they have with them. I think the queue is at about 13 hours at the moment, but keep a look at the tracker if you're just joining it so that you know what you've got in for you. Of course, if you're joining the queue now, you're actually going to be getting here, where I am at Westminster, sometime early tomorrow morning, which puts it in some kind of perspective, doesn't it? We're going to talk about the Queen's fashion, and we're joined by Alexandra Schulman, who was former editor of British Vogue. Alexandra, thank you very much for joining me. And when I was thinking about doing this interview, I think when I was growing up, I would look at pictures of the Queen and think, oh, she's rather frumpy. And then recently, we've looked at lots of photos of the Queen because of the Jubilee and now because she's died. And I'm sort of awestruck by her fashion and how she both evolved with fashion, but actually kept to a very clear sense of her own fashion.
Yes, I think that when we look back over that long life and you see the kind of constancy of her style, that she somehow managed to wear the same clothes, the same silhouettes, broadly speaking, certainly her whole look with her hair and her makeup was very, very similar. But she never looked old-fashioned and she never looked fashionable. And that was her secret, that by keeping out of fashion, she was sort of always in fashion.
We see a lot of people wearing black, of course. You're wearing black, I'm wearing black. But it strikes me that we rarely saw the Queen wearing black, unless it was for a period of mourning, I imagine.
Yeah, I don't think she was allowed to wear black. And I read somewhere that she said she couldn't really wear beige because people wouldn't notice her if she wore beige. Whatever she wore in public, she had to wear so that people could see her and so that she looked like the Queen. So she wore these really bright colours, which we might think a bit garish, but actually it meant you could spot her from miles away.
I mean, she said that thing, didn't she, about she had to be seen to be believed.
To be believed,
So there was a reason that she was wearing bright. It wasn't necessarily that she liked then strong colours. Do we know if she even had favourites of colours and things she liked and didn't like?
Well, I think when you see the more private pictures of her, for instance, at Balmoral over the years, or sometimes when she had sort of the Christmas pictures taken with the kids and things, she's normally in very soft colours, like pale blues, for instance, sometimes a pink, certainly not in that kind of pillar box red or that, you know, royal blue that we see her in engagements. So I think she naturally veered towards a softer look when she was on her own time.
Of course, during your time as editor of British Vogue, you must have spoken to a lot of British designers. Did the subject of the Queen's fashion and her influence on British fashion ever come up?
I don't think that designers were influenced by the Queen, but I think they were influenced by the kind of pageantry and heraldry of the royal family. And of course, abroad, people talk about le style anglais, and actually the Queen embodied that. I mean, sort of slightly chicken and the egg. Was it that the Queen wore cashmere and tweeds and headscarves and barbers and macintoshes? Was that why people thought it was the style anglais, or was she actually wearing what was the style anglais? It's probably 6 of one, half a dozen in the other.
Did designers like designing for her?
Well, she used a very, very small and trusted retinue of designers. So certainly in the early days, people like Norman Hartnell and then Hardy Amies were the designers who designed for her, and I think they very much liked working with her. But latterly, she didn't really use commercial designers, and towards the end, I think Angela Kelly, her dresser and her great companion, was actually designing her clothes. I think somehow that sort of exposure, that the way you expose yourself to a designer, was not something by a certain point that she wanted.
No, we see it with the younger royals, don't we? There's often comments about what they're wearing, and then Kate will wear a dress and it'll sell out in 2 seconds flat, but you didn't ever hear that with the Queen.
Well, not in my time, but I wasn't really around when she was kind of 30 to 40, so it's hard to know exactly whether that was the case. But I don't think so, because also you didn't have mass fashion in the same way. You couldn't wear a polka dot dress and then suddenly find that the high street would run them up because it was popular. It just didn't work that way.
Talk about her evening gowns. She had these amazing evening gowns, of course from when she was very young, her coronation, but also every state dinner she attended, particularly when she was in her 20s and 30s. And she looked, that for me is when she looked like the epitome of glamour.
Well, the British are brilliant at evening wear. I mean, I don't know quite why, but even when you think of Queen Victoria, who was rather a dumpling, she looked jolly good in her evening wear too. And the Queen's sort of the use of lace, pale colours suited her, the amazing jewels she had. I mean, you know, jewellery does help of an evening.
Fantastic long gloves.
Fantastic long gloves, and this very beautiful kind of pale complexion she had that was quite luminous, I think. So in the evening, when you would have all the jewels and the lights and the ceremony, she really kind of glittered.
How many hats do you think she owned?
I couldn't hazard a guess, but millions, right? There's got to be an exhibition of the hats.
And the hats were really, that is something that did almost more than anything else. The hats seemed to change with the decade and with the fashion of the moment. Because she went through a period in the 60s and 70s where her hats were very much of that time.
I think she used, again, the hats were so she could be seen. It wasn't so much being respectful, and they had to be very specific, so that they had to be off her face, so that people could see her face clearly. But I suspect she also quite liked the kind of security of a bit of a sort of frame as well. Yeah, they did change, and you know, there are pictures of her in more like kind of tam o' shanters and then these big hats, but I think she liked to play with her hats, and as we know on royal tours, she liked to kind of message through her hats, and they would be decorated with emblems of the country she was visiting.
Alexandra Shulman, thank you very much for joining us. I would love to have seen the packing that went into a royal tour, because of course, as you know, Christian, I travel with several hat boxes, but perhaps not quite as many as Her Majesty.
I do know that, yes, I am familiar with your packing, Catty, but not just as royal as Her late Majesty. Good to see you. I should just bring you up to news. Busy day, as Caddy was saying, for the royals. In fact, they've been hosting a lunch today for the Governors General from across the Commonwealth countries. Governors General, of course, the sovereign's representative in these countries. They've also been on walkabout, which has really, I think, raised the spirits of those people who've been in the queue today. And this is the picture now at Victoria Tower Gardens. Still plenty of people, as Caddy told you, around 13-hour wait. So those who are joining the front of the queue, some miles away, will finally get there in the late morning, maybe the early hours of the morning tomorrow, and in Westminster Hall, where the grandchildren will tonight stand in vigil at the catafalque. That is the scene there. Plenty of people queuing silently, respectfully, as they head out of the back doors of Westminster Hall. You're watching BBC News.